Can you hear me? Yeah, okay, so I should hold the mic instead of doing that. All right. Good morning, everybody. Come on in. Don't be shy. There's plenty of seats up front. Expect folks will be trickling in. Thanks for coming out to brave this weather. That was not the thing I wanted to wake up to this morning. It was not boding well. But I'm excited to see the folks that have made it out here. Hopefully this will be a very good and insightful day for folks. Thank you for coming to our annual Market Investor Day. I'm Eric Harmon. I'm our Director of Commercial Outreach. I lead our outreach to commercial property owners, small businesses, and the like. And this is a day for that audience. We hope to provide a lot of interesting information for you today, but want to start the morning with Cook County Assessor Fritz Kaegi.
Thanks, Eric. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming in here. And I want to encourage you guys to leave a little bit of room on the aisles, because as people come in because they've been delayed because of rain, if you could come forward and then leave some room on the aisles, then as people come in, it won't disrupt you as we have all the great panelists speaking. So I really appreciate all of you attending here, braving the rain. And wanted to thank you for coming to our 2025 Market Investor Day. Since 2019, Market Investor Day has become an annual event where our team gives you useful tools and data to assist you with planning and underwriting. Can you hear me okay when I put it here? Is that? Can you hear me okay? All right, great. Now I can have both hands that I need to talk with. This is a great opportunity for us to show you all the tools and data that can help you with your planning and underwriting all of the work that you do in making markets. And it's an opportunity for you to meet our valuations and data leaders. If you guys who are data leaders or leaders on our team, if you could raise your hands if you do valuation or data. Great, awesome. Come and meet us, talk to us. We want all of you to see us today. And we look forward to the event today also because this is where we get to hear from you, your thoughts, and from leading investors and experts in our industry. This morning, we're going to talk about a very important topic, predictability. And predictability is, really a key question that has been on the minds of so many of us. It's why we need more of it and what's required to get more of it. That's what we're going to be talking about today. And I see so many of you here this morning, and I think about the conversations that we've had over the years. You've told me so many different stories about deals that didn't get done, deals you would have made, ideas that might have panned out, but they didn't pencil out, about the numerous costs of dealing with the system, including appeals, returns on even successful investments that could have been bigger if you had a bigger exit, taxes being seemingly random and unpredictable, and you've told me about the harmful impact that has on perceptions of our market. People who might be interested in our market, but don't take that first step to investigate more, just because they might have heard something that might not even be true anymore, but it's something that they'd heard. So this is all something that we need to work on. If we get more predictability, things would be good for us. Who's heard the word redlining invoked in this context? There we go. All right, you guys know what I'm talking about. Sure, we've all heard of this. And this is really the question of predictability. And it's one of the most pressing issues on the mind of observers and would-be investors contemplating the future of our region. So let's think about how much better our situation would be if we could put changes in place that would provide better predictability. Let's look at it that way. What would we get with better predictability? First, I think we all agree that more deals would get done, right? We'd see fewer people sitting on the sidelines because the underwriting process would be easier. Unleashing the creative energy and vision that I know so many of you have and so many of your colleagues have in projects that you've contemplated but might not have gotten off the ground. Second, more predictability would expand our property tax base and drive down rates for all property owners. This is because of the way our system works. We have a levy-based tax system, so the amount of taxes that have to be collected are predetermined. More base translates to lower rates automatically. That's the way our system works. So if we can do things to grow that base, that is one of the best things that we can do to get us to a better future, especially if we have liabilities that are built into the system that people are already worried about when it comes to pensions. We can grow out of these burdens if we have a bigger base. Third, the costs of compliance would go down. I know market participants would love to be reinvesting and using the cash that you have to use to pay for lawyers and appraisers and instead use it on more productive purposes. Think of all the investors. Think about how much money is being diverted because of these costs that are a drag. These costs are, in fact, a giant drag. And if we could reduce them, our system would be better off and it would help investment activity. And fourth, I think one of the most important and compelling outcomes of a more predictable system is that your investments would increase in value. Here's why. Think of all the different drivers of value. Let's start with cap rates. Think about the premium that we have that are attached to cap rates here, the spread that's put on cap rates just because of the risks that we have in our system, the unpredictability in our system. Think about how much higher our cap rates are than comparable jurisdictions on the coasts. To me, that is an opportunity. If we can reduce that, that could be one driver of value for people who are invested here today. We would be getting better, as owners, you would be getting better net rents if we could reduce this unpredictability. Your tenants, your prospective tenants, would feel more comfortable making those decisions, taking on the liability of a lease, if they felt comfortable with that predictability on taxes too. And that would drive value for building owners. So if you think about our market today, where so much is priced in when it comes to unpredictability, to risks, to unpleasant surprises, you think of how much that is priced in. If we could reduce that risk being priced in, it would create a lot of value for people invested today. Providers of capital, buyers, they wouldn't require these risk premia and discounts that are currently required, and more potential investors from around the world would come in, people with lower costs of capital. So at a time like this, when market values in some property classes like office are so low, there would be really compelling opportunities for people who are invested here today. So that's what we can gain from more predictability. Okay, great. So how do we get there? Let's walk through it. Now, one of the key things that's required for any change to our system or any state for our assessment system is that it does have to be accurate under state law. And because we have a zero-sum assessment system where we're all sharing in levies together, it's required that any framework that we set for assessments, whether it's predictable or not, it does have to be accurate. So focusing on accuracy is sort of the sine qua non for any future state of a better system of predictability. But if we grant that, if we're getting to more accuracy, what are the things that we could do to get better predictability? So let's think about, okay, we have to have a system that's accurate, but then what are the things, being mindful of the fact that we're getting accuracy, because that's what other taxpayers in the system need from us. What are the things that we can do to get better predictability? And I think really that's the key thing to think about. And we can do this. Chicago was built on doing things better. We built swampland. We turned swampland into canals. We turned canals into the center of our whole continent's railway network. We use that to create a world-class city that serves as a hub for finance and tourism, logistics, commerce, transportation, healthcare, world-class universities, world-class workforce. world-class healthcare system, and so much more. And we can see the ethos of this betterment in some of the big plans that are underway now, like the large quantum campus that's being built on the city's south side, the reconfiguration of downtown office buildings into modern living spaces, the whole repositioning that's taking place now that's still in the early innings towards more residential downtown, and the new mixed-use designs for old, obsolete suburban malls, and office complexes that are being turned into data centers. These are some examples of big projects and big thinking that are taking us in the right direction. But okay, great. So how do we get to more predictability? This is what we're going to be talking about this morning. A little later, you're going to hear from a panel that I'm very excited about. It's outside investors who will present some of their ideas on this front. And while we don't necessarily endorse any specific aspect, haven't run the numbers on them yet, we wholeheartedly embrace the vision, the ambition, the spirit, and the thinking behind these ideas, because that is what is going to be required to get us to a better place. All of us working together and thinking about, what if we came up with more simple rules? What if we came up with better data collection? What if we came up with other things that were accurate but reduced the costs and made it more predictable for everyone? How much better could that be? And so this is going to be a terrific panel and discussion, and we also want to hear what you're thinking, because as a market, it's going to require all of us to realize that, hey, while I might have had a chance to do better by working through this morass of appeals that are totally unpredictable myself, as a market, it doesn't work out that way, and there's a better way to do it that's simpler, accurate, but then reduce the costs of doing it and makes our market more investable. And so I wholeheartedly embrace your thoughts on thinking and other suggestions as we go forward. So that's going to be an exciting part of the panel later today. For my part, I want to start by looking at a recent study that came out from Cook County's Property Tax Reform Group. This was the group brought together by Cook County President Tony Preckwinkle. It takes a geek like me to get excited about this, but this was the most comprehensive study of its kind ever done in this county, looking at multiple years of commercial assessments, more than 1,000 transactions, seeing how they panned out, and it came up with great recommendations that serve as an ideal path towards a future to getting us to a more predictable state. And it's achievable. It's something we can do. This was done by a panel of experts who came from the rest of the country, where it's already being done that we can do here. So in December, this group published a study that compared commercial valuations done by our office and those done by the Board Review, a separately elected office that handles assessment appeals. Some of you might have heard of them. They looked at how the assessments coming out of both offices compared to actual sales prices. This is the acid test. You can talk about whose assessments are more accurate, but when you test them against actual transactions, that's the acid test, and the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Well, what was the single most important result of this study? You see the headline here from the Tribune. The most important outcome of that study was that commercial properties in Cook County were found to be underassessed. And specifically, the board found a tendency for commercial assessments coming out of the Board of Review to be too low, missing industry standards for accuracy. And this was true nearly across the board in the suburbs. In the city, meanwhile, the report found that our values were on the money when it came to the most valuable properties. So let's look at what that means. For commercial properties over $5 million, these are assessments that we did in 2021, right in the teeth of one of the hardest parts of the pandemic, and then tested against transactions that took place in 22 and 23 and 24. It found that we were right on the money for these commercial properties in Chicago over $5 million, 102% versus the target of 100%. But the study also had important conclusions. And by the way, our work was not found to be perfect there. It found that our assessments of commercial properties were a little too high for middle and lower tiers of commercial properties, the ones below 5 million. So that we have work to do too there, which I'm sure some of you could testify to as well. But there's another really important finding in that study that sort of is a reminder about what a future state of the system should look like. The report found that appeals overall made assessments less accurate. Imagine that. So assessments at our office and then the board review made the system less accurate. And appeals created too much variability in assessments. So not only did they make them less accurate, they made them less uniform. It created a wider frame of risk for people in the system. So in other words, the system that many of us work in, that's evolved over the decades, that all of us interact with, where commercial property owners keep on filing appeals, and these appeals on the whole, they don't improve outcomes. The whole construct of the past was basically found in the study to be totally ineffective as a system. Okay, so going back to the past is not a good alternative for us. It keeps us trapped. Going to a better future where we get more predictability, more simplicity, more accuracy, more transparency, that's the way forward. And so here are some of the things that the report recommends that we do, that we as the assessor's office do in tandem with the board of review. One, work together on capitalization rate studies. So look at the transactions that have happened, look at different sources, and come to some agreement on cap rates that are driven by this data. What are the cap rates that are evinced by actual transactions and data points happening in the market? Second, develop a forward-looking property tax rate for use in our valuations. The study, very importantly, found that the practice of using an old historical tax rate was not appropriate. That you should be using an effective tax rate that takes into account changes happening in the tax base, and it recommended a way to do that. It had a very long section in the report on how we should be doing that. So that's developing a forward-looking property tax rate. That's one of the most important recommendations in the study. Third recommendation is more data sharing between our two offices. Fourth, work on a common IT platform that allows us to share data more easily between our two offices. 5, devote more resources at the assessor's office to appearing at Board of Review hearings in order to defend assessments against appeals and flimsy evidence. And lastly, work on legislation to require high-quality property tax data. Now, some of these, like the data collection bill, are initiatives that we've been working on for years. And some of you in this room have been great partners in getting us to a good place on this. So we have a bill which began as the data modernization bill, but is now called the physical descriptions bill, that has reflected years of discussions between commercial market participants. We've eliminated some of the objectionable aspects of data that was considered to be private and proprietary, and there are no opponents to the bill anymore. We have a roll call of more than 60 Democrats in the House. So it's on a good path to finally getting passed. So this is something we've been working on for years. But there are other proposals in this report are new ideas that we've already started to implement, and we're proud to be pushing these forward. We're planning to share data from our system as the Board of Review works through commercial property appeals for the last townships of the 2024 Chicago reassessment. So we're providing much more of that data to them. And we've also developed a framework on the effective tax rates that was mentioned in the report. Instead of relying on outdated past data that artificially inflates tax rates, we're now accounting for changes in the tax base and levies and valuing properties using a tool that some of you will be familiar with here from past investor days. The countywide group, together with the Civic Consulting Alliance, which is this bringing together of some of the biggest consulting firms in Chicago, have been working to develop a timeline and multiple different work streams off of each of those recommendations to follow up on them. And we wholeheartedly embrace all the recommendations in the report, 100% of them, and we're committed to seeing them through. And we're bringing these forth to the Board of Review. And I want to emphasize again what this means and what it means for all of you here to be here in discussions on a topic like this. Those with the most resources to appeal their assessments are the ones most likely to benefit, while the opacity of what's being produced coming out of Board of Review certifications, they make it difficult to discern exactly where values will end up. That status quo is just not getting us there. It's not giving us what we need in our system. And so what it's producing today is a result it's like a jagged landscape of commercial property values today. That's what's being produced after everything comes out in the wash. And it's treacherous for property owners and investors to navigate. The system of mass appeals, as the report found, it's not making assessments better. So what we need to get to instead is a system that's fair to everyone, including those who want to invest in Chicago and Cook County, better assessments and a more predictable way of arriving at them and predicting them and estimating them and accounting for them. That would smooth out our jagged landscape and let you get a proper look at the ground where you're thinking about staking a claim and building something for the benefit of us all. At this event last year, we shared some other tools with you, information that we've been doing to advance your ability to underwrite and make good investment decisions. Every time we reassess a township, every time we put out information from a new township, we put out information on every single commercial parcel that shows the metrics we used in valuing it. Estimating income, vacancy, expense ratios, cap rates, and property characteristics. And that lets people know what to expect from our office and point to specific places where they disagree with our assumptions. We've been doing this for 5 years now. The word hasn't completely gotten it out, so we want people to know that for every commercial parcel, you can see how that value is being arrived at our office and the sources that we're drawing from for it. Last year, we also presented on our affordable housing program that gives assessment-based incentives to developers. For new housing construction, we offer an incentive that gives long-term predictability in assessments in return for creating affordable units for working families. That helps make projects feasible in a sector where there's a thin margin between profitable and unprofitable. Last year, we also expanded on our software package that's called PTAC Sim. This is first released at our 2019 Investor Day, but it's been built to be something much more useful since then. It lets you delve into how different scenarios for levies and assessments can affect property taxes and individual properties. You'll hear more today from our data science team about the exciting assets that they've been putting out, including a whole new data set with rich permit information from jurisdictions on every kind of property. So we're excited about this new data set coming out. And in recent years, we have more commercial industrial analysts. Some of the new ones are here today, a bigger team behind the leaders that you'll hear at the panel this morning. We've been improving our data collection, pulling from more sources, and we've been building out our team to appear before the Board of Review. When we reassess the county, we go out and visit with mayors and other local officials. Just in the second term, I've met with more than 100 mayors, one-on-one, in our amazing county. And we also talk to their local development officials and staffers to hear their on-the-ground intelligence about what's going on in their communities. A big part of our work in this area is just sharing our observations with the public, with all of you. Last year, we spoke about the outlook for Chicago ahead of the reassessment. Today, I want to walk you through where we ended up, and then we'll give you a similar preview of the North Suburban reassessment that recently began. As I mentioned earlier, you can go out and look at the data behind our decisions online. You might have also noticed some of the op-eds that I've written in the Tribune and Cranes on how we arrived at values from the data that we've gathered. You can check those out. Of course, we can always get better, and that's one of the reasons we welcome conversations like the ones we're having today. This city of Chicago is the biggest job that we have in the whole county, of course. It contains about half of the county's parcels of property. In total, assessed values in Chicago grew by about $9.5 billion, or 23% over 2023. Total assessed value was $50.8 billion. In the reassessments, commercial property values grew a bit more than residential property values, but the shift was not especially large. About 2 percentage points of the tax base moved from residential to commercial. After appeals with the Cook County Board of Review are finished, these values are used to set Chicago's property tax base. And if these values stand, they will mean a lower tax rate for everyone. All but one of the city's 77 community areas saw residential home values increase materially since 2021. Our assessments reflected this change in market values, which is a reflection of the bullishness that ordinary Chicagoans feel. The affordability that we have in our residential housing stock is one of our greatest advantages, and buyers are looking everywhere for it. So they're really the most optimistic investors in our city, average Chicagoans. As I noted last year, the top line change in commercial value doesn't do justice to the large and diverse landscape of property tax types and trends that we see. In downtown office buildings, which is the one that we automatically sort of mentally go to when we think about this, our assessments reflected the flight to quality phenomenon. High quality buildings with better amenities, the trophies and Class A, were able to attract tenants and had lower vacancy rates as a result. These buildings are a minority of the total stock of office space and footage, but they're the majority of our property tax base when measured in dollars. B and C class buildings, of course, are struggling. And they constitute the majority of the stock of footage, but coming into the reassessment were a substantial minority of our property tax base. That's an important thing to remember in the dynamics. Loop retail is not doing as well as some of the neighborhoods. Recent press coverage has highlighted the resurgence of boutique shopping corridors along Damon, Armitage, and Southport, where vacancy rates have plummeted. Another thing I'd note is industrial properties, and especially data centers, are continuing to thrive. Today is a day, I guess, where the Trump administration is going to be announcing a lot more tariffs, creating a lot more trouble on top of the trouble already being created. But if we take a step back and think about the larger trend here, it is good for Chicago area industrial, because corporate supply chains across many different industries are all realizing that the trends that happened in the 90s and the 2000s and the 2010s, where you were making your supply chain get longer and more deeply embedded in foreign markets across the world, that probably ran too far than they were comfortable with. It creates too much risk for them in terms of supply chains getting disrupted, costs changing, things like tariffs suddenly being applied. And most industries in the United States and around the world are thinking about this concept of nearshoring, thinking about alternatives in their supply chains, building more here in the United States, or sourcing more just in time through airports or other kinds of creative ways of managing the supply chain, especially as interest rates get larger. All of that is really helping to turbocharge industrial here in Chicago and its suburbs. And it's a trend that I don't think is going to stop. And you can see that coming out in the numbers. Data centers, of course, are being powered by the trends that we all know. Many of us are watching here today remotely, and that's because of the cloud. That's because of people being able to work from home. That's because of software as a service, and that's because of AI. All of these things are driving the demand for data centers. And the Chicago area is in the sweet spot for building out new data centers, because not only are they close to users who need it, but also we have plentiful opportunities when it comes to energy here in Illinois. We've been an exporter of power to the rest of the Midwest. We have low-cost power, and we have multiple different choices for where that power comes from. So that makes us a great place for building new data centers. Multifamily apartments have seen large valuation increases, perhaps due to a lack of new construction. This is something we've tried to remedy with the Affordable Housing Incentive Program that I mentioned earlier. We now have more than 10,000 units participating in that program. This year, we're reassessing the north suburbs so we can give some guidance and expectations there. We sent out our first assessments last month, and we've seen strong growth in home prices continuing. Overall, residential values look to be up by about 20% across the north suburbs this year. On the commercial side, we should remember that county study that was done. What did it find? It found that commercial properties were about 30% too low when it came to valuation in that commercial study. So as a result, we should expect commercial to go up more than the 20% by which residential is going up. Data centers, industrial, and multifamily apartments are sort of the stars of this show. For those of you who look abroad to other markets, in Europe they have this term beds and sheds. Sheds are the term they use for warehouses. This is kind of what we see in the north suburbs too. We're seeing industrial and multifamily residential doing well, as well as data centers, of course. In January, Hines, for example, which is sort of the ultimate blue chip investor in real estate, paid a record $150 million for the E2 apartments in Evanston. So we have to make sure that properties like these, which are doing well, aren't getting an unearned haircut during the appeals process. So the market is also adjusting and repositioning, which is healthy. We can see that in plans to redevelop Skokie's Old Orchard Mall and the Golf Mill Mall in Niles to adapt them to more contemporary uses for retail and housing. And last year I spoke about the need to push back against this doom loop narrative. This kind of apocalyptic thinking is out of touch with a lot of the positive trends that are taking place. And I think regardless of, there of course is structural adjustment that has to happen in different sectors of commercial real estate, but we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that we need to be looking forward and thinking about how we improve and consider how we can make Chicago and Cook County a better place for investing and for growth. We should embrace our identity as a place that thinks in big terms, that likes to do things better, that borrows from how other places are doing it better and adapts it here for what we need to have an assessment system built for our needs and for what we really deserve and for what you deserve. So I've offered some suggestions today around the important theme of predictability that I think will move us in this direction. With these ideas in mind and with other bright ideas that you'll hear today, it's my hope that we can really continue to improve and better the places that we all love in, invest, work, and live in. Thanks, guys.
So we do have time for a few questions. I'll have the mic kind of roving around if anyone has burning questions. Yep. Okay.
Drew Wade, SRGB Capital. Thank you. That was wonderful. Brought me back to the very core fundamentals. My questions, and obviously we're talking about value, and it's just amazing when I heard that, the index, 2 basis points above, in the midst of the pandemic, and you were right on spot for commercial, which you talk about spreads and, in this day with tariffs and, what's happening. But my question pertains to the fact that at the end of the day, there's still, with all the great data here, it's all about you're only as good as the information. And in this day and age, when you think about, like the United States Department of Digital Services, as it was formerly known, now named after a meme stock, DOGE. One of the core pieces there is all about the removal of waste, and a lot of waste happens to be with fraud. Has there been any kind of studies that your organization has conducted or that you're aware of that have dealt with, just pinpointing the waste or the fraud that takes place and anywhere within the supply chain that ultimately impacts that data that you've been so properly able to align with, if you understand the question?
Thanks for your question, Drew. One reminder, your question is one good reminder that we're only part of our overall property tax system. So our job, the assessor's office and other participants in the world of assessments, is to estimate the value of properties, but we actually don't determine how much taxes are being levied or raised. Those are driven by our taxing bodies. That's driven by largely schools. Schools represent about 2/3 of the property taxes collected in Cook County. It's a total of about $19 billion in total, and schools are about 2/3 of those. And then there are municipal governments, which are sort of number two. Then way down below, you have the county at about 10% of that, and a bunch of other taxing bodies. I don't think anyone would suggest that having thousands of units of government is efficient. And I think there are good efforts being done led by our governor and folks in Springfield to have more consolidation of these units of government, because that will reduce their costs. And I think people in Illinois sort of know this in their bones. I go to a lot of town halls, and I go to in some communities in the south suburbs, and people really express frustration at some of the spending that they might see from school districts. Where I was reading that one of the school district officials is making $500,000 a year for not great results. So I think those kinds of things are a reminder of the importance of democracy. We just had municipal elections yesterday. And I tell people, like, if you want to monitor what's going on with levies, if you have just one place to go, I'm really glad you're here talking to the assessor's office, but I think you should go and go to school board meetings. And there's been a lot of discussion about school curricula and masking and stuff. Start asking about how they're spending money. Because I think our taxpayers should all be asking, our people who spend the money, do you know the value of my dollar? And when we've done polling on what's on the minds of average people in Cook County, property taxes are number one among healthcare, education, corruption, crime. Property taxes are number one on the minds of average people. So that's what I mentioned on that. Insofar as dodgy financial practices, one thing that we're on the lookout when it comes to assessments is to make sure that we're not using transactions that are involved in money laundering or that are fake in valuing other properties. So for those of you who might not know this world, in the world of money laundering, real estate is a huge conduit for money laundering. And the incentive in that is to overpay for, like, if you want to take money out of China, a great way to do that is to overpay for property here in Cook County, because then you've just laundered more money if you do it to a related party. So we're trying to be on the lookout for situations like that so that we don't use that transaction to assess other properties too highly that are not in line with market. So we're investing a lot in validating sales. Part of the hiring that we've been done is, and this is one of the recommendations in the commercial assessment report that President Winkle oversaw, was to have more validation of sales to make sure that we're using the right sales when we estimate value.
Okay, thank you for that. More questions? Okay, see one in the front, Adrian.
Thank you, Assessor. Adrienne Morawski with the Illinois Realtors, Chicago Association of Realtors. You've talked about the urban, or the doom loop, I believe is the correct term that you've used. In the city, do you anticipate residential owners feeling some of the similar hits that the south suburbs felt last year?
For those of you who weren't following this last year, even though levies in the south suburbs went up about 5 percentage points, the typical homeowner's bill went up 20 percentage points in the south suburbs last year, and the typical commercial bill fell 8 percentage points. I don't think we'll see an extreme change like that in Chicago based on the assessments that we sent out. But on the other hand, if the board review cuts commercial assessments a lot, like they have done in the north suburbs and south suburbs, it is possible. But what's the difference between Chicago and the south suburbs? There's much more base here to work with, so it's not as vulnerable to assessment cuts that are too excessive. The wonderful thing that Chicago benefits from is having a very broad-based residential and real estate market. So I wouldn't expect as big a change as the south suburbs. But I don't get the last word on that. That one is, the final word is at the board review. What I do know is that we'll be appearing more at their hearings with good data to stick up for the base and keep rates down so it doesn't happen.
Okay, I saw a question up front here.
Hey, how you doing? Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
I just had a question. You mentioned that all but one set of the 77 neighborhoods had property value increases. I was just wondering which neighborhood that was that didn't increase, and also is there a matrix or a website where we can see where, like, for instance, like Woodlawn increased this much as opposed to Rogers Park increasing in value?
Yes. So on our website, you can actually look at almost neighborhood by neighborhood and precinct by precinct, almost how much assessments changed. And we actually released the whole data set to the public. So that allows policy observers to do their own analytics on it, so they don't have to take our word for it. But the only neighborhood area where transaction prices didn't go up over the last 3 years was the Gold Coast. And that's because values started out very high there, and people who are buying and selling from each other, I think they're hearing a lot of negative chatter, and so some of the values and transactions there went down. But pretty much everywhere else in Chicago where homes are more affordable, that's where new homeowners are looking to buy. And so that's why we saw in every other neighborhood area, people are paying more for homes there. The trend of the Gold Coast is a little bit different. In the wealthiest suburbs, we're seeing values go up the most in the north suburbs. So if we look in the north suburbs this year, the highest increases were in New Trier, where the highest values are there. So I'm not sure we can read across any trend, but I think people who are paying a lot of money for homes are kind of tilting to buying them, up in the North Shore rather than the Gold Coast. For people in Woodlawn, if you want to do analytics on Woodlawn, what you can do is go to our reassessment report for Hyde Park Township, and you can go and look and see at all the transactions that happened there, and you can see it not only for what happened in Woodlawn, but also Washington Park and Hyde Park itself. When we reassessed Chicago in 2021, it led to about a fall of a couple $100 in the typical homeowner's bill in Woodlawn and Washington Park. I don't know if that'll happen again this year, though.
So I see a few hands. We only have time for one more question. There will be more opportunities throughout the day for questions, so you will get the opportunity, but in this segment, only one more. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jason Cummings from Google Public Sector. My question is regarding, how you track some of the information related to properties. I know that over time, properties can change from residential to commercial, and in other cases, properties may, even if they're residential, you may have additions and physical changes. Just wondering how you capture those changes, and if you involve any technology, or if you go to the properties to do that, or if you're leveraging technology.
Great, thanks for asking. I don't want to give any secret tips to Google, but we're happy to incorporate the stuff that we do and that you use. So we have multiple different layers of trying to see what's going on out there. The first building block is building permits. So we have 133 municipalities in Cook County, and each time there's a building permit happening, that then goes into our physical census of properties, and we use that rich information to update what is there. And that allows us to do modeling on transactions that have happened on each of those properties. So like the basic enterprise here is in a 3-year period, about 10% of the properties might have transacted in the residential area, but we have to value the other 90% too. Using that building permit information and physical information is very important in modeling for how we value all of them. The second line of defense after that is to have our staff, our team, to go out and visit sites that have had permits issued on them to verify that they're there, to update any other information, to see what's there. So that's the second line of defense. And our staffing level in our field unit is the largest that it's ever been, and it continues to grow. And they're equipped with more technical skills. And by the way, if anyone is looking for giving advice to young people who want to get into a field, this is a great way to get a foothold in the world of data analytics and real estate, is to work at a place like ours, to be part of using enhanced technology to go out and walk the streets and see what's there. Third, we have this great technological tailwind that Google also uses, which is using visual imagery and other kinds of imagery to look for discrepancies in the data that we have. The one where we're swinging for the fences is one where the fourth is we're swinging for the fences by working with 15 other jurisdictions like ours across the nation, both Republican and Democrat, our largest assessors. So we have a group where we're seeking access to the Uniform Appraisal Database that the federal government keeps at the FHFA, the Federal Housing Finance Administration. Basically, any home that has a mortgage in America is basically guaranteed by the government. And under the Dodd-Frank Act, the appraisal that underlies each of those mortgages and the rich information that it has about condition and quality inside, and the footage and other aspects of it, it goes into a national database, whether you refied or bought new. So there's a central database that the government has on most American homes that could also be used to reconcile against us. And we were just at the National Association of Counties last month, and this proposal, and we've met with the White House on this, by the way, the last administration, but the National Association of Counties, which represents mostly Republican counties, has made this one of their national planks in advocating for opening up this database. It would be free to assessment districts across America. It'll make property taxes more fair, especially for homeowners at the bottom end of the spectrum. But those are some of the ways that we go out and get data, but we're always on the lookout for more. And part of this event here is we want to bring together an ecosystem of people who want to create new tools that will help to make this better. Companies as big as Google and startups can all help us see what other ways can we gather tools so we can see what's out there, and then through that get to better, more accurate, more predictable commercial assessments. So we're trying to sustain a culture and ecosystem of people in the private sector who can try to create tools to solve these problems, and we welcome Google and others coming at it.
Okay, we're going to close out the plenary. Thank you, Fritz.
All right, thanks.
Great, and that question was a nice segue into our next panel. For this one, I would like to introduce Nicole Jardine, our Chief Data Officer, and Gene Cochran, Senior Data Scientist. Please come up.
I thought that was a really great question about how we get new property characteristics data. I am Nicole. I head up our data team. We're typically known for some of our high-tier data products, like the automated valuation model that's used to value nearly 1.2 million residential parcels, and PTAC-SIM, which is our research and simulation software used to analyze and predict Cook County's property tax system. Right now, those two tools are mostly for coders. So today, I'm really excited to be here with Gene to talk about permit data that is available, ready for analysis, And you can even follow along on your phone or your laptop if you want to check it out. We answer a lot of questions from researchers who have emailed us things like, can you help us analyze all the construction activity in this neighborhood? And in the past, I've always had to respond to these emails with kinds of guidance like, well, are you looking at residential or commercial? Well, if it's residential, okay, you can go to this asset on the commercial data portal. Or if it's commercial, look at this. And you might have to look for age of under 1 year, or using class changes as kind of a proxy for this development. We also get questions from home buyers or and investors who want to know things like what work has been done on this property. I'm someone who's been on the real estate market recently. I use Zillow and Zenlist to pull up listings, and right now we had to rely on text descriptions in those listings to see whether there's been construction done on that property. Homebuyers might also use LoopNet, but more recently, the Cook County Assessor's Office has been publishing permits on its website. If you don't know this, you can go to cookcountyassessor.com, go to any PIN, and if there have been permits received by the assessor's office for that property, it's there on the website. Here's an example. This is a children's hospital in Oak Lawn. This is a screenshot of the permits section of the Cook County Assessor's website profile about this. And here's an example of the first permit that pulls up. You can see that that permit is accessible. You can see the amount. You can see the description. And there on that top right, you can see a little arrow. And you can see that there are actually a lot of permits on this property. Here's the second one and the third one. There's actually 86 permits just for this one PIN that are publicly available to scroll through. And that's great. It's really exciting to be part of an office that is making this permit data transparent to the public. But wouldn't it be nice to filter by whether that permit is accessible, sort by the status, or even sum across the amount? So today, we wanted to share where you can get data about permits that is machine readable, well documented, and ready for analysis and API integration. We're hoping that this one single data asset will help researchers and home buyers and journalists, as well as our app developers who might be ready to use this to show permits for a property. So today, the tool that I want to talk about is the Cook County Open Data Portal. We publish a lot of data on the data portal, but the new one that we're excited to talk about is about permits. We just published this a couple of weeks ago, and I brought Jean here to talk about it. So Jean, we want to build an asset that is API ready. To do that and use some software engineering skills, what is this data? Where does it come from, and how do we put it out there?
Yeah, let's dive into it. So I'll talk about the permits open data asset, as Nicole mentioned. The first question is, where does this data come from? We get permits primarily from municipalities through our smart file system, which is like a form that municipalities fill out when they have permits to submit to us. This is what the form looks like from their perspective. That's how it goes for most municipalities and townships in the county, with one big exception being Chicago. The city of Chicago does not submit permits directly to us anymore. We pull permits from their open data asset. So you can see here, this is the open data asset for permits on the city of Chicago side, which includes all of the permits that they have in their database within the city of Chicago. So we have most municipalities submitting permits to us, and then for the city of Chicago, we are pulling from this open data asset. We have a automated process that pulls from this open data asset, does some simple cleaning, and then creates different assets for our permit specialists to review and upload to the smart file system. And so when we combine both of those streams of permits, we get our one source of truth database of permits. ISWorld is the internal system that we use for our data management. So all of those permits coming from municipalities across the county are flowing into our internal database. And what we have done recently is push those permits from our internal database into our open data portal, where they can be used by the public, by people outside of our office. This is a little screenshot of what it looks like when you land on the permits open data asset on our open data portal. You see a basic description. If you expand that, read more, you'll see lots of nuance about what's contained in the data, different sorts of pitfalls that you might find in the data. We have some basic information about the data set too. You can see that at the bottom. It tells you things like when was it last refreshed, how often do we refresh it. So basic information to help you work with this data to answer the questions that you want to answer about permits. So that's where the permits come from. That's where our data comes from. I'll talk a little bit about what it actually looks like in the data set. We have 550,000 rows in this data set with 18 different columns, so 18 different attributes of a permit. And each row is a permit for a parcel. So a parcel can have multiple rows if it has multiple permits over time. And a permit can have multiple rows if there are multiple parcels that are affected by that permit. Hopefully that makes sense. A little bit of nuance, but basically if you understand that, if you understand what every row means here, that it's a permit for a parcel, you can answer interesting questions about permits in aggregate. So here's another quick view of some of the basic information that you can see about the data set when you're landing on the data portal. Things like how often is it refreshed. These are the columns that are available to you. There's 18 of them. Some of them are more and less interesting, I think, to the general public, but just a couple that I'll call out as being particularly interesting, I think, from my perspective. We have the status, which is the status in the CCAO, the Assessor's Office's internal workflow, so you can see, has this permit been worked by our office yet? We have an accessible column, which tells you, did our office, if this permit has been worked, did our office think that this work should affect the assessed value of this property? And then you have a work description, which is on that right-hand side. That's the raw text description that was on the permit submitted to the municipality, and that tells you exactly what the municipality knows about this permit. We have a couple of other fields. We have these job codes, improvement codes that are sort of like attempts to classify that information, but the work description, the raw text, is sort of the authoritative information about what is actually going on. So that there's a lot of like interesting things that you could do with free text analysis on that work description field to try to extract information that might not be fully filled out in the proper way in job code and improvement code fields. So all of this, again, is up on the open data portal. If you look at the asset, you'll see this, but I wanted to call out some interesting things and give you a quick overview of what you can see. Now we'll give some examples of questions that you could answer. So all of these are just using the Open Data Portal interface. You can click on Query, and then you can visualize your query. So one quick question, how many permits do we have per year? You can break it out by year. You'll see each bar here is a different year, and the y-axis is the count of permits that we have. So this is like a quick hit of what time periods are contained in our data and how complete is each year. You'll see that starting in 2020, we really start to have completeness in the data, and before that, less reliable. So that's useful if you're doing analysis on this permit data. You can also break out these counts even more. So we can ask how many accessible permits are there in every year, and the different colors in the bar will show you the proportion of that count that is accessible or non-accessible as determined by our office. So red here being non-accessible, blue being accessible, and that changes in a different proportion over time than the total count of permits. So I think that's also interesting. We can break this out even further. We can search in that work description column to try to figure out how many accessible recs are there per year. So here we're filtering the work description column for the word rec, which commonly indicates a demolition of a property. So this is taking that previous question, making it even more specific using the work description column to try to figure out, well, among accessible permits, what does that look like for demolitions and recs? And then we can also flip the y-axis. Instead of doing raw count of permits, we can use the amount column, which is the estimated amount on the permit that the municipality receives for how much that work is going to cost. So this is like a rough estimate of the amount of permitted work that we have over time, and you can see that that also moves in a different direction than the total count of permits or even the total count of accessible permits. So you can use these different filters, these different columns to aggregate on to answer more and more specific questions about permits. You can also look for specific permits if you'd like to. So Nicole had pulled out on our website how you can walk one by one through permits for a specific property. If you're on the Open Data Portal, you can also use the filter feature to look at all of those permits at once. So here we're filtering for one specific PIN, one specific parcel, and we're looking at all of those permits that we have in the database. We can look at sort of the high-level information about them all in one place. We can also do simple aggregation here. So here we're grouping by accessibility for that one pin, and we're summing the amount. And so here you see for accessible and non-accessible permits for this one pin, what were the dollar amounts that were on the permits. So this is kind of like an even more specific question that you could answer using the permits open data, allowing you to aggregate across many permits without having to click through each permit, potentially like scrape the permits from our website. I think that was the last example I had. I'll hand it back to Nicole to sort of wrap up, but we can also talk more about this here or later if you want to talk through questions that you have about it.
Yeah, we're really excited to publish Cook County's first county-wide source of permit data. You can join up to these other data assets that we publish on the portal, and we're excited to announce this. To get here, go to cookcountyassessor.com. There's a data tab, and on there is a link to data sets on Cook County's data portal. Thank you, and I think we'll take questions.
Okay, yeah, give him a hand, please. So Nicole and Jean, do you have time for a couple questions? I know there's some data folks here. I see this hand first. Steve Vance.
Hi, Stephen Vance, Chicago Cityscape. So this is awesome, thank you. I think it's fantastic because for the first time ever, somebody can now see that there's construction in, 113 municipalities? So, but I have a practical question. Can you give some examples of what are accessible and non-accessible work descriptions? And then can you go over some of the patterns of work descriptions that you've seen? Because as a data permit producer myself, when I added other municipalities, there was a lot of work that was just uninteresting. So like building pools and porches, are those accessible?
Interesting is relative.
I think you spent more time kind of digging into
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Sorry, Steve. So you had kind of two parts to that question. One was an example of accessibility, and then the other was like, what patterns have we seen in work descriptions? So our data integrity team works on the accessibility, non-accessibility field, so I'm not an expert in it, but like a very simple example that I feel confident in is like a wreck is definitely accessible. If you're demolishing the improvement, that's for sure going to be an accessible change. If you are, adding a fence to your property, you've probably seen that a lot in different municipalities if you're looking through the permits. That is not an accessible change because from an appraisal perspective, I'm also not an appraiser, so like full disclosure there. My understanding is that a new fence is typically not accessible. So that's sort of like a simple toy example. I think I would expect it gets more thorny when you're getting into the weeds, and I would definitely consult with an appraiser there. I am also interested to hear what appraisers think about our accessibility field. I think it's going to be really cool to hear feedback now that this is public. So that's accessibility. Hopefully that helps answer that question. In terms of patterns in work descriptions, again, I think our data integrity team is probably it can speak to that more than I can. I have not looked super deeply into patterns in work description over time. I think your impression matches mine that permits are like overwhelmingly non-accessible. I'm not a property owner in Cook County, but my understanding is you have to get permits for a lot of different stuff, even if it doesn't change the value of your property. So my guess would be that what you're seeing is correct, that most of the work descriptions are for minor changes that are not actually accessible. But I would love for somebody with text analysis experience who has more free time than I do to really dig into it, and it might be something that we will take up as a team too. I'll let Nicole speak more to that.
Yeah, I'll just comment that the open data asset refreshes roughly once a month. So with that, you can actually track whether a permit that was pending has actually been sorted into accessible or non-accessible status. We're also, so we have, for anyone who wants to email us, you can email us at assessor.data@cookcountyil.gov. We've already gotten some requests to update the data asset, adding a couple of columns. So we're happy to consider other requests.
Okay, and I see some people recording too. We are streaming live on YouTube, so this video will be available, the full day will be available on our YouTube page forever. So just one more question here.
Drew Wade, SRGB Capital. Wonderful presentation, of course, Gene and Nicole. Question is around just, what types of model training that might be, available, or if it's not, or what is available, what they are, but also maybe something, and maybe this is to a wider audience, some models that, for training, purposes, for automation, would you see, within this very important, vital area?
Yeah, right now, this permits data is not used explicitly in training the model. With our model, we use roughly 9 or 10 years of past sales and transactions to predict the January 1 market value of the property. Permits have kind of an interesting workflow in residential evaluation. There is something called the home improvement exemption that someone receives if they are doing an improvement to their home, like they're adding something to the property that increases the square footage, like a room. Our office receives that permit, and we automatically apply a tax-saving exemption to that property. My colleague Ray can explain a little bit more with questions about that later. But the short version is permits kind of have an interesting effect on the assessment of the property that we don't take into account in the model right now. But maybe if we play with it and do some feature engineering, could be interesting to look into that. Anything else?
I will say that our models, the residential models that we have on our team, are open source, so you can go look at them and fact check us on that statement. If you search for our GitHub, if you just search for Cook County Assessor GitHub, you'll find our GitHub page. The commercial models, I believe, are also available on the website. Is that right? Or the Open Data portal?
Open Data and on the website.
On Open Data and the website.
Hi, Sadia Davis. Question around, I was just looking at a pin yesterday for a vacant lot. So can you talk a little bit about how vacant lots apply, and then structures, for example, we're building for Above and Beyond a new free food pantry in Lawndale. And so that building has been vacant for several years. Could you speak to the difference between a vacant lot and an existing structure? Thank you.
Like a vacant lot versus a structure that has a commercial vacancy?
Correct. So nothing on the lot. It's completely vacant, probably once had a structure, and I think it's residential as opposed to a commercial lot that has an existing structure that has not been used for several years.
What a great development, so that's good news. I will let our evaluations expert speak to that briefly, whether it's classified as purely vacant land versus residential vacant land or commercial vacant land will have different effects on the level of assessment and therefore its property taxes. But I think that's a really good segue to some valuations folks. So thanks, everyone.
Okay, time for maybe one more question, Nicole? Can you take one more? All right. She was just about to break away. You got just in time.
Thank you. Wonderful presentation. Asia Lamar of Native Investments. From an asset tracking perspective, how far throughout the life cycle are we able to measure using the open data portal? We talked about zoning, kind of permits, entitlement. How far from those early on stages through, a structure's been built, perhaps it's included an opportunity zone, and now this is the associated revenue, benefit, et cetera, economic impact that we could measure from that construction activity. So I guess throughout that entire asset life cycle and that transaction process, how deep is our visibility today? And then from a road mapping perspective, where does the assessor's office want to go?
Feel free,
Yeah. So I think, am I right that you're asking sort of like using our open data, how can you see all of the different changes that are happening to a property over its life cycle? Cool. Yeah, I think a couple things immediately come to mind. So permits is really nice because it gives you a window into the very start of changes that are happening to a property. This will be when a property owner is saying, I'm going to make a change to my property, and then at some point in the future, that change is going to happen. So you'll see that in our permits open data asset, that something is happening here, particularly if it's an assessable change. We also, thank you for moving to our open data overview. I think our Single, multifamily, and also commercial characteristic data is another interesting way to look at property life cycle. Once our data integrity and field team respond to a permit and determine that something has changed in the property because of this permit, they will make a change to that property's characteristics in our system, and then that will be reflected ultimately in these characteristic open data assets. So you can look across these two data sets and see changes that were planned in permits, and then changes that are actually reflected in our data once that work has been completed. We also have our assessed values data set, which tells you what did we estimate the value to be for the property. I think that's another interesting piece of information to pull in. How did our office respond to those changes in the characteristics? How did we actually change its value? I think that you could also pull in clerk data to look at the actual tax bills to see how did tax bills change. And our PTAX SIM package that Fritz mentioned earlier is also another way that you can look at tax bills and you can ask sort of these counterfactual questions of like, if the assessed value was slightly different, what would the tax bill have looked like if the permitted work hadn't happened? So those are the things that just sort of come to mind. If you have more specific questions about like specific properties you want to examine the life cycle for, we can definitely chat after, and I can see there might be more information in these other open data assets that could be useful. Anything
Yeah, I
else
wanted
to
to shout out for sales as well, right? If you could track the permits and sale prices of a property before the permit work occurred and then after, right? So there's a whole lot of things you can do just by going to open data and looking at data per pin.
Thanks for that. And Nicole and Jean will be here, so if you want to grab them in the hallway or anything, have a burning question. But yes, please give them a hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole and Jean. For our next session, we are going to bring up some industry experts to talk more about predictability, as Fritz teased earlier today. So I'd like to call up and introduce Michael Fastnacht, Chief Growth Officer and President, Chicagoland for Clayco, Michael Reschke, Founder, Chairman, and CEO of the Prime Group, and the moderator for the session, Liz Holland, CEO of Able Associates. So come on up. There are mics on each of your chairs.
Sit in the middle, or do you want to sit in the middle?
So they want you guys on one side, so I'm sorry.
Why do you have to move? I'm sorry.
It's okay, I can move the chair, you stay where you are.
Yours is not on
I'm
yet.
very facile.
This is on mine. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you all for being here. It's, we all get a prize for swimming over this morning. So I'm Liz Holland. I'm the CEO of Able Associates. We are an 84-year-old Chicago-based owner, manager, developer, redeveloper of commercial properties in Chicago and then throughout the Midwest. And I'm going to let my esteemed fellow panelists introduce themselves.
Good morning. Michael Fastnacht. Most of you probably know me from my days at working with Mayor Lightfoot and then Mayor Johnson at World Business Chicago as the CEO of our city's economic development organization. And some others know me from as a regional micro-influencer on LinkedIn. And that was a joke. Thank you. And currently, I joined Clayco. We're the 10th largest privately held company in Illinois. We're one of the largest fully integrated real estate companies, from architecture, design, engineering, development, construction. A lot of projects in Chicagoland, but also nationwide. And now it's my honor, pleasure to introduce my good friend, the one and only Mike Reschke.
Thank you, Mike. I'm Mike Reschke, founder, chairman, CEO of the Prime Group, a company I started in 1981. So we've been in business, headquartered here in Chicago, and been developing and investing for over 4 decades. City we live in, grew up in, love. We've developed around the world, around the country, taken companies public, but last 20 years we've been heavily focused on investing and developing in downtown Chicago and in the hospitality and office sector with many projects on LaSalle Street, including the redevelopment of the Thompson Center for Google.
And Mike and Clayco, we partnered together to buy, like 5 months ago, the famous Jewelers building on 35 East Wacker. So we are both big investors and believe in the future of this great city.
Yes, yes, we continue. I have never seen values, I mean, we're talking about real estate values in the Loop as low as I've been around. What office buildings and properties are trading for today in downtown Chicago is at a generational, well, a 50-year low. And at my age, I thought I was at the twilight of my development investment career until COVID hit. And the Thompson Center became available to buy at what we thought was an unbelievable, attractive price. And then values just have continued to plummet. And so we've continued to pick up and buy some beautiful historic buildings with plans to renovate, some of them to convert to hospitality or housing and the like. But the opportunities are plentiful, in part because it's a huge basis reset going on right now in downtown Chicago.
It looks like COVID made you a young investor again.
Yeah. Yes. It's a good one way to look at it.
So we're here to talk about predictability. You can't agree on a solution until you agree on the problem. So in your view, what is the biggest challenge to the predictability of property taxes? And I'll share a very quick aside. We think about predictability from an ownership standpoint, maybe an equity investor or a capital provider. I have seen senior real estate management teams who have carved real estate income and expense out of the calculation of their annual bonus pool because they're tired of seeing the unpredictability of real estate taxes subsume their ability to get rewarded for their hard work all year. So that was, for me, a new one. So I'm curious what you gentlemen think predictability is. What is the problem?
So if you allow, maybe I'll take a step back, and because I'm not a property tax expert, Mike is much more the expert on this, but if you look at the big picture right now in Chicago and Chicagoland, we're in a tough situation. And I think you cannot solve a problem if you don't acknowledge the truth. And I think my take is right now, especially in the city of Chicago, the status quo is not acceptable in regarding to economic development. Because in property tax and predictability is one part of it. Because I think some people got confused. We're talking about just properties, about corporations or talent. Ultimately, economic development, we have to attract and retain three key sources of tax revenue: talent, corporations, and then as well, any kind of assets we have as well. So, which means capital. So
Tourism, too. Tourism.
Which is for me talent as well. So talent, corporations, and he always likes tourism as well, and capital. These are the three things we have to focus on. We have to pitch every single day. We have to retain what we have, and we have to attract more. And predictability of our property tax is one part of that. It's not the only thing. A company, a person will not say, oh, I'm not moving to Chicago because of that, but it's part of that. And I think we don't have right now an integrated pitch and story to say, this is all going well. This is why you should move as a young college grad. Luckily, a lot are still moving. This is why corporations should move here, or why capital should invest. And look at 3 data points that concern me and really keep me up at night. Right now, we have 6 cranes in the city of Chicago. 6 cranes. It's probably a historic low. Despite mega development, 1901, the quantum park that we involved, we have 6 cranes right now. Second, this year, next year, and 27, we'll roughly deliver 1,000 apartment units in the city of Chicago. 1,000. We need at least 5,000. And I don't hear any cry in public, okay, this is challenging because ultimately this will lower our attractiveness as a city because average rent will go up. It's a massive issue. And then third, if you look at just overall the GDP numbers, Illinois is doing okay, but the city of Chicago GDP growth is significantly lower than peer cities and nationwide. So we have, for me, the key thing to start with, the status quo is unacceptable, and we all need to work together. And I think Fritz and his team has done a great job. We saw on digitization, on transparency, and I think Fritz is a key element of building this integrated, holistic economic development traction story.
Predictability is the key, especially when we have markets that are through generational volatility high levels. We talked earlier about how values are at an all-time low. Well, they're going to bounce back eventually. So how does the assessor, who has an extremely daunting task, value 130,000 commercial properties in Cook County every year, because I think it should be done every year, and we'll talk about that in a second, not every 3. It's a daunting task. Well, what we need to start with is to predict real estate taxes, we need to have a predictable valuation methodology. Every asset class needs a simple, clear, transparent, and objective, not subjective. Appraisals are subjective. We need an objective valuation formula for every class. And then we need owners to report the information needed to fill in the blanks of the formula, and that's your taxes. No uncertainty. Let's start with hotels, which is a disaster right now. Right now, hotels are valued subjectively, thrown in one of 5 buckets, without any measure within those buckets of how individual hotels are performing. And the placement of certain hotels in different buckets is subjective and sometimes wrong. Hotels are easy to have a simple system that'll be fair, just based on room revenue, which is reported every month as 17.4% guest room tax, and based on the sales tax that's collected on food and beverage sales. So it's a simple formula. 1.5 times your annual room revenue and 50% of your annual sales tax. I mean, your F&B revenue based on all measured based off the sales tax reports you file. That data is available today. We don't even need the hotel owner to report it because he's filing monthly revenue reports with the county already. Well, 1.5, you get a valuation and you're done. And every hotel owner will know every year as his hotel rates go up or go down, as his occupancy goes up or down, he'll know exactly what his tax bill. And a buyer of a hotel or a lender trying to lend against a hotel can do that. Same with office buildings, which is the most daunting class, I think, to value, and the most important class, just with 165 million square feet in downtown Chicago alone. And the simple way to value an office building is based on the net rent. And the owner just fills out a form every year, is the net rent on each floor was this. This is what I collected. And if the space was vacant, it's valued at $40, which works to like $2 a foot. If you collect $20 in net rent, based on my formula, you'd pay $8 a foot in taxes. Well, what's the formula? It's simply 8 times the net rent you collect. And then work it through the tax system, 8 times the net rent on that foot. Let's say somebody's paying $20 net rent. That would be $160 valuation, times 25% assessment rate is $40, times a 3.0 equalization factor is $120, times a 6.99% tax rate that was levied in 2023, it works out to $8.40 a foot in taxes. $10 net rent, you pay $4. $40 net rent, you pay $16. It's simple, it's clear. If the space is vacant, you pay $2. And what's even better about this system is it gives office landlords, for the first time, the methodology to charge different tenants in a building the right rent, the right amount of the tax bill. Right now, it's been archaic. I've been doing it for over 40 years, and I've complained since I was a kid, is why does the guy at the top of the building paying me $60 rent pay the same real estate taxes as the guy at the bottom looking at the alley and paying $20 in rent? No, they should pay different, not based on square footage, but based on the rent they pay. This would give the landlords the opportunity to properly allocate, and none of the tenants are going to complain. In fact, they're going to be happy. And the tenants that are paying the big bucks at the top, they don't care if the taxes are higher. They expect their taxes to be higher. It's as simple as that. And more importantly, when a big tenant moves out of a building and your income goes, down dramatically, you know your taxes are going to get reset to the vacant rate at $2 a foot. You don't have to wait 3 years for the next triennial. It goes down immediately when the cash flow stops. And you fill out your report, you sign it, you send it to the assessor's office, he processes it, and that's the value of the building. Same with retail. Same with industrial.
Because I know you're on the run here. So
yeah, I'm sorry.
No,
I don't
okay,
mean to hawk, but
since when
I
are
get
you
passionate
Since
about
when are
it.
you apologizing?
Oh, I'm sorry.
What I love about what Mike Reschke is doing, we might not all agree with all the details, he's being part of the conversation with Fritz Kaegi, with President Breckwinkle, with the governor, because we need solution. It all comes back to that we all realize, either as business leaders or elected officials, the status quo is not acceptable. And that's why I applaud your effort on this. And I know we can do all the details. We might not agree on everything, but I think Mike's effort is the right that I'm very supportive of.
Yeah, the key point is we're not changing the status quo. We're not changing the constitutional or legislative framework. We're not changing the Illinois property tax code. That already grants the assessor the discretion and the authority to set the formulas and the methodologies to how to assess the fair cash value of properties in Cook County by class. He just has to do it uniformly with a fair and reasonable formula. And it's up to him to adopt those formulas. And so I've asked Fritz, we've been talking about this for a year now, going back and forth, and we've had great conversations. The first time we met, we realized we both had the same goal, is that we need a better system that's fair and transparent and predictable and equitable and without shifting any burden. This is not about shifting burden back to residential. I mean, residential, unlike any of the other 104 counties in the state of Illinois, Cook County residential is assessed at 10%, commercial at 25%. The other 104 counties, both commercial and residential, is assessed at 35%. So
but I think that's an important point because with residential, sometimes I feel like we're fighting over a shrinking pie instead of figuring out how can we grow the pie? How can we grow the tax base with more people, more corporations, and more capital coming in?
Well, let me ask you a question, Mike, on your solution, because it's an interesting idea. Does your solution solve what I like to call the water tower problem, where you have a functionally obsolete piece of real estate in a prime location and the net taxes are 3 times the net rent?
Yeah, well, it would, because the taxes of a water tower should be equal to whatever the net rent is. But let me give you a really interesting example in water. Let's take 70 West Madison, which is sold for $75 a foot, a building that last traded 4 years ago for over $400 a foot. Massive decline in value. But there are tenants in there that still, why did it sell so cheap? Because the large tenants only have 3 years left in their lease, and the expectation is they're going to be moving out of the building. Well, but those tenants are still paying $25 net rent for another 3 years. The real estate, now, under my system, you buy the building, the buyer is going to know exactly what his tax bill is going to be. It might not be his purchase price. It'll be a factor of the net rent he's still collecting while he owns the building. But his benefit is on the vacant space, he knows his taxes will be $2. But it'll be, you know, the formula for the tenants still in place. But when those tenants do stop paying rent, his taxes will adjust back to the vacancy rate immediately, and he knows the predictability and certainty. If my formula was in place when Bank of America auctioned off 70 West Madison, I think the building would have sold for twice what it sold for. The reason why it sold so cheap is because the real estate taxes now are $12 a foot across the board. And so the gamble that the buyer had to make was that he's going to be able to get the real estate tax bill on the building lowered from, you know, $18 million, which would be based on a $400 million valuation, to, let's say, $3.5 million, which would be the tax bill on a $70 million valuation. Now, is the assessor going to do that? Is the Board of Review going to do that? Well, technically, it was an arm's length sale. He paid this price. Now, was it under the Illinois Property Code? Was it a sale that was without distress? Well, I would argue Bank of America marketed the building around the globe for more than a year. How could it not be more than a fair market process, arm's length? But is that the right system? I think my system is a lot better. Madison Dearborn, CIBC Bank, some of the big tenants in that building aren't expecting their tax bill to go down dramatically just because the building sold at a deep discount. And it's not even equitable to necessarily for them to think that.
So I have to say, Fritz must really like you to put you up here on the podium to promote your plan.
I'm honored that Fritz, and thank you, Assessor, for inviting me here today, but we have the same goals, and we have the same love and passion for the city and to do the right thing. And this isn't about trying to reduce taxes, it's trying to add certainty, predictability, to stimulate more institutional investment. and commitment by the banking communities and insurance companies, pension plans, to come back to Chicago and invest. That'll bring values back up. I mean, right now, Chicago's redlined by half the world.
Well, so that's a good segue. So when you talk to capital allocators who have other markets to choose from, why do you think Chicago is redlined, and is it appropriate for it to be redlined?
So first of all, let me challenge the notion of redlining. So I think it's the wrong term, and as the marketing and branding guy, I would always refute that we are redlined, because by saying it, accepting it, we are redlined. So it's not a smart thing to say we're redlined. It doesn't help us. But we have to be honest. We are missing out on opportunities on domestic international capital who don't look favorable at Chicago. It's a fact. We're missing out, and we have to change that. Calling it redlining is not. Why? I think the predictability is a challenge, property tax. Some of them don't think we are business-friendly enough, welcoming enough. And I think third, they haven't seen the growth, the population growth, the economic vibrancy, the diversity they've seen in other areas. I think we all have to realize, and sometimes some people don't understand that, we are in Chicago part of a free market system. We're competing every single day where a company makes a decision where to invest the next $100 million. No company, no CEO has a moral obligation to invest in Chicago. They don't. That is a business decision. And I think we, as business leaders and elected officials, have to fight every single day. We should not take anything for granted. If you look at some of the headlines about some of our corporate headquarters last week, we shouldn't any company take for granted, or any capital investment. So I think we have challenges. I think we have to be much more sales-oriented. We have to signal we are open for business. I think the governor and some of the leadership, President Beckman, have done a phenomenal job at the Quantum Park to attract that. That's how, when we all focused on attracting it and had a great sales pitch, all leaders in Chicago land work together in Illinois. We don't do this enough. We don't do this every day. And I think I feel like people wake up and think, oh, these people just invest, these people just stay, companies just continue to invest. No. Every day, whoever you are, we have to wake up and continue fighting for it. We are not New York, where's the financial capital. We are not LA with the sunshine most of the days. So we should take this as almost an honor that we fight every single day and call these companies. And I told all of elected officials, don't be shy to call CEOs and thank them for the business that they're in our city investing.
We are redlined. You can call it whatever you want. We are.
That's why we're here together on this.
Believe me, I'm in the market every day raising capital, debt, and equity for all the projects we have. I spend 80% of my life doing that. And it's never been more difficult to raise debt and equity for projects than a project based in Chicago, especially an office building today. When we bought the Jewelers building, good example, the Draper, I even hired a broker because we wanted to cover the globe. Went to over 200 institutions for a modest 40 to 50% loan. Not a big loan. We got one term sheet from an Asian bank because we had a Chinese partner involved, and they made a 30% loan with Bob and myself personally guaranteeing it. One loan out of 200 inquiries around the globe. So that's more than redlining. We're blacked out. I don't. It's worse than that. It really is, Mike. Now, how do we fix it? We fix it by getting predictability back in investment. Give you one great example, which is real time, like the JW Marriott, which we're negotiating to try to buy back. We developed that building 15 years ago. It was foreclosed on. It suffered through COVID. Jones Lang LaSalle went out to the market to buy it. The building has. I guess it's public record, but let's just say it has 15 million of EBITDA, and it would normally sell for 170 million. Okay, and it was about ready to get bids in that range, but it got its new assessment, and the assessment would have doubled the real estate, more than doubled the real estate taxes from 5 to 12 million, taking the income from 15 to 8. Everybody dropped their pens. The seller freaked out. Property's off the market. Capital markets stalled. No investment. The seller's trying. The seller, which is the senior lender, which took the property back, what is he going to do? Well, he's hoping to either have the assessor make an adjustment or the board of review, but in the meantime, there's no capital.
And as you can see, one of the reasons why we're here together, we want to show as well how we can respectfully, civically disagree with each other, because we're not redlined. But in his story, what he said about the Asian investor, I clearly, true immigrant here. I see the opportunity. International capital, to some degree, is easier right now to sell Chicago to than domestic. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity for Chicago. Chicagoland attract more international capital, because if you look at Asia, Europe, Latin America, they still look at the United States as an amazing economic opportunity. I think we are very well positioned with our key basic features, with the airport, with our diverse population, to attract more international capital. So one of my focus at Clayco, in kind of with any elected officials, how can we get more international capital in? Because they don't understand even the term redlining.
Well, and so how do you make that case, Michael? If you're talking to an international investor who can invest anywhere on the globe, before we're at a point where New York is submerged by climate change, before we're at a point where Los Angeles burns down due to climate change, and we are in the happy Goldilocks middle, how do you make that case?
I think, I pitch our region every day. It is really, for me, climate resiliency. The climate change is a real factor on the coasts. I think we are still in a dynamic, vibrant global city with an amazing airport and public infrastructure where people want to live. So quality of life. And then thirdly, our academic system that's unmatched. Whatever we think about Miami, look at the GDP numbers in Miami. Miami is a village, GDP-wise, versus Chicagoland. It's so small. Why? Because they don't have a real university system like we have. You can't build this. So I think there's some great selling points. I went with the governor last year to Japan. I think hopefully we go this year. But you have to be out there. I told for my days, you have to show up in Japan once a year. You have to show up in China once a year. You have to show up in Europe once a year. Always continue promoting our city. But I think you have a very receptive audience. I think we have a lot of success. If you look at even the hard numbers in like advanced manufacturing, data centers, a lot of international capital flowing in. And then I think we also have to think much more less city versus region. I believe one of my theses, it is Chicagoland alone is like the 22nd largest GDP in the world, of a country. We have to think as Chicagoland as one super region, because a super region with the most creative, interesting people will do and solve the biggest problems of mankind. Ultimately, there will be 10 or 15 super regions globally, that's my belief, will solve that, and the majority of economic growth will happen. We have a right to be there. We shouldn't be number 23. We should be top 15 or top 10. I think that's why I love all the regional coordination, because that's how we have to think. And sometimes the artificial city boundaries, that's not how people think. That's not how town thinks, capital, or corporations.
I mean, Chicago's one of the greatest cities in the world. In the United States, it has one of two public transit systems, which is a priceless treasure, which will always keep Chicago one of the best world-class cities in the United States, period, because of our public transit and our airport and our central location. That's really important. What's happened to Chicago is it's become the most affordable big city in the United States, which is important. And it just is a beautiful skyline. It's a beautiful city. It's clean. The crime issues are overrated relative to other big cities. Our educational system, our hospitals, our infrastructure, parks, we talked about that. There's no reason not to love Chicago. That's why when kids graduate, especially from all the Midwestern universities, where do they all want to come? They all want to live in Chicago, and that's the immigration. I mean, look at, I'll give you a stat from Google. Last 8 years, when Google hires new employees, they can go to any office in the world. Once they qualify for a certain position, there's slightly different pay levels at different offices because of cost of living differences. But Chicago's been #1 selection the last 8 years of every major city in the world for new and transfers at Google. JP Morgan just made a commitment to stay in Chicago and stay for another $500–600 million investment in their headquarters. Why? Because Chicago 2 years ago passed Texas as the cheapest place to grow in terms of affordability. And Arizona, Texas 5 years ago we're cheaper. Now Chicago's cheaper. So there's a lot of great things happening. We just got fix the predictability of taxes, which is a self-inflicted wound.
Yeah. You forgot some of the great hotels we have, like the Sal Hotel that I think you own.
Yes.
So yeah.
Yeah. Well, we have
to keep
we have a
selling.
great convention center, and tourism. I mean, we're the number 2 in 2019. Let's use pre-COVID numbers. We had 61 million visitors. Number 2, New York was number 1 with 65. We're not far behind New York at 61 million. Now, we're 55
I think,
last year, but we should be back to 60 million this coming year. Our tourism is a big thing on our convention calendar. People love coming to Chicago.
No,
When we go on tour together to promote the
yes,
city.
I can see you need to take it on the road, absolutely.
We try to get an act at Lollapalooza together on stage.
Who's your warm-up band?
No one can match up as a warm-up. Sorry.
Well, so the question I have in the final analysis is, where do you see Chicago going? If you are able to persuade Fritz to adopt a plan that, as you said, Milwaukee's adopted, New York City's adopted, better predictability, better capital allocators, want to invest there. So where do you see Chicago going? What is the brass ring that we're all trying to reach for in solving this problem?
Maybe I start and then over to you. I think the fundamentals are super strong for Chicago and Chicagoland, but we have to be real that the status quo is unacceptable. We have to agree on that and accept that we are part of a free market society in this country, in the world, that we have to compete every day for that. As long as we all agree on that, elect officials, nonprofit leaders, business leaders, I think we have a bright future. And for me, the benchmark is always the region, not just the city. I want to be one of the top 10, 15 super regions globally from a vibrancy, from an innovation perspective, from an equity perspective. That should be our North Star.
Well, I think Chicago's got, because of our fundamental assets and the fact that we're at such a low point, we have nothing but upside next 10 years. I really do. I mean, that's a good news. We definitely, I think the knife has finally hit the floor. So you can stick your hand out and pull it out of the floor now and nothing but upside. There's some fundamental things we got to fix. I mean, the tax thing is easy to fix, but that's just how to assess property. What's more important is the levy. How do we control the levy? And how do we get control over the, municipal, county, and state spending? How do we wean off the COVID federal dollars, which was like a cocaine for the last 3 years, and now we're going to this budget crisis. Everything from the CTA to the school district to the state to the city, I mean, everybody has looming budget crises, in part caused by the pension problems we have that are well known at all low levels of government, thanks to our Illinois Constitution. So there's some fundamental things we need to do. Fix the pension problem. That takes an amendment to the Illinois Constitution. Maybe we need to also amend the Constitution at the same time, put in a little bit progressivity on the income tax, but the trade-off is to amend the pension clause at the same time, and that would be a good fix and get us on the right road to some long-term fiscal solvency. Once we fix that, I think we got nothing but upside, because we got the assets here. Oh, and we need to fix a few sports teams, but I forgot about that.
You would be a great
In many
linebacker.
respects, there's only one way to go on that too, Mike. So there's only one way to go on our sports teams as well. So
Let's be clear,
that knife hit the floor.
The Chicago Fire had a great start of the season so far, so let's be very clear here. The one sport that really matters.
So I think with that, it's time. I think we should open it up for questions. Thank you again for being here, and we tried to provide different points of view, so happy to ask.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Rick Lynn. I work with RML Capital. You just worked right into the most important thing is sports teams. You talk about going all over the world to try and promote companies that come to Chicago. How can Chicago lose the Chicago Bears? They're the best anchor that there is in the world. There's none better, and the city should do that. And I have no financial interest, but the best place, in my opinion, is the Michael Reese site, because that piece of real estate is the best maybe in the world, It's all along Lake Michigan. It could be a fantastic place. So my question is, how are you going to keep the Bears in Chicago?
Oh, that's a loaded question. Do you want to go first?
I'll go.
Go ahead, go
I don't think the Bears will leave Chicago. And I don't think it takes a lot of public money to keep them. I think it needs thoughtful design. You just look at what it costs to build enclosed football stadiums the last 20 years in the United States. It doesn't cost $6 billion. You can build a really nice enclosed football stadium for $3 billion. So I think we need good design, good value engineering, thoughtful budgeting, and then either. I don't like the idea of tearing down Soldier Field. I don't like the idea of tearing down an asset to create parkland to build another stadium next door. It just doesn't make common sense. Okay. So another side on the lakefront is fine, but I don't think it's a big deal with drones and the cameras in the sky. It could go to the 78. It could go to a lot of different locations. It doesn't have to be right on the lakefront, but it has to be in Chicago by public transportation or with good access to the highway and public transportation. I have confidence, hopefully, that the ownership of Bears will, keep it here. It's my opinion. Mike?
Thank you for taking the question.
Do you work for Arlington Heights?
I'm too involved in all these stadium conversations. So, but no, I think that if we look at the public sentiment, I think the public sentiment is not very favorable for any public subsidies for the stadium itself. And I think we have to solve for that. I think infrastructure support and public subsidy, I think that can be debatable, but that's, I think, one of the hurdles has to be addressed.
No, thank you. Is there?
Hi, thank you. My name's Lene McHugh, and Michael, listen, no one is more bullish on Chicago than you. You have all the facts and all the information, but I am curious as to how our political climate nationally is affecting international investment.
That is a very good question. I mean, you might be surprised I was not born here, listening to me. So as a European, I mean, it's a challenge. I think the tourism number will suffer, honestly. That is my prediction right now. I see a lot of friends who said, I'm not coming to the States right now. So I'm curious if my hypothesis. So this is one on the tourism side. I think overall, you have to be also realistic. Before the change in Washington, there were a lot of international companies from all over the world wanting to invest in the United States. Because despite all the problems we have, we are still the fastest growing, best performing economy worldwide. So they all say, okay, I need European countries, Asian countries, I need to be part of this market to be long-term successful. So with the change in Washington, you have now two different reactions. Some international companies say, I have to accelerate my investment in the United States because of tariffs. So we see some potential upswing, honestly. On the other hand, some companies getting more nervous and feel more uncertainty in making a pause for the next 6 months. So I think we have to be very fair, try to be objective on the data. On the one hand, I see an upswing. On the other hand, I see uncertainty and downswing. The tourism numbers, I'm really concerned. You see how the first impact from Canadian tourism coming here. So that's kind of my three perspective. But I think, honestly, for Clayco, I think will be very, very promising next couple of years. Where advanced manufacturing companies all want or need to be here in the United States physically. And that will be, I think, for Chicagoland, another opportunity to benefit from that.
Mike, do you have a view on what you think happens to the Chicago market in light of the challenges the U.S. has globally?
When you say that, and I got to ask you a question because I didn't understand the question. What happened?
If Trump, with all the uncertainty, I think that's just the tariffs. Some people feel not maybe as more welcomed anymore here. I think that was the question.
I don't see it affecting people. I don't see the administration in Washington affecting travel to Chicago or the economy of Chicago necessarily more than his actions will affect maybe the economy a little bit. I don't believe any given president or any governor or any mayor is going to move the needle of what happens in the GDP of Chicago, state of Illinois, or the United States more than 10%. And it's just on the margin, and that's usually telegraphed which way it's going to go. You can make adjustments to ameliorate that 10% shift. I think people get way overhyped about a lot of things, but the fundamentals of supply and demand and the economy and the like I mean, we're the biggest GDP in the world. I mean, the President of the United States isn't going to change that position.
You know, it's a good question. You know, I worry about the perception becoming the reality. I think we live in a world where there is no objective, factual, external reality that can't be modified by someone's perception of it, because now we all have a much bigger platform than we used to because of technology and social media. So to Mike's point about it being overblown, I worry about the pendulum swinging too far in an isolationist, retractive, you know, I don't lose anything by not doing it, right? I don't gain anything by doing it now. Maybe in a market like Chicago, you do lose something by not investing once the knife has hit the floor, right? There's no better place. There's no clearer business where you're going in, investment is more indicative of your future success than real estate, right? You can't change anything about the location or your basis ever. And so that, I think, is one of my concerns, is that people who have different markets to choose from choose different places because of the perception becoming the reality. And an isolationist stance on the national level and a hostile to a world market view will change people's choices. That's my concern.
You know, it's good that the pendulum swings back and forth. That's what democracy is all about. I mean, we went way too far left, too woke, and the like, and it's swinging back the other way. You know, I'm not going to make a political comment on it, but I think the pendulum is a good thing to have in life, and that's what democracy is all about.
So I have a question regarding adaptive reuse conversion. I have a property in Cook County, Western Cook County, that has been vacant for the last 3 years, and I'm trying to convert it from a vacant office building to a 32-unit apartment building. So how would the property taxes change from a vacant office building to a building under rehab and then to a, you know, basically an occupied apartment building? How do property tax changes during these 3 phases?
Maybe Fritz should answer this.
Don't you have the assessor here.
He's the assessor. You're not yet the assessor.
I chime in here on your question. You know, as the owner of the property, what you do is you seek, you do all the building permits, apply for those. You would apply for the building permits to make those changes, and then we would recognize the changes in the use, and then you would seek a change in the classification of the property from commercial to residential. And we have Eric Harmon, who's here, who heads our commercial outreach, our outreach unit. And Eric heads all our contacts with all the different industry verticals, but also helps individual investors with questions like this. So we get all variety of questions. We've seen almost anything. And Eric may not be able to answer it himself, but he is the resource for all the investors watching out there whenever you have questions. So Eric, do you mind if I give out your email? No, all right, so it's ERIK.Harmon, HARMON, at cookcountyil.gov. And then he can be in touch with our different analysts who might look at your property and can give you answers to a question like this. We get a lot of questions like this, and Kelvin Harris, who has been holding the mic he heads our civic engagement. He's our chief civic engagement officer. Last year we had a record amount of outreach events. We had almost one outreach event per business day in 2024, including 60 in Spanish. And some of them are just commercial property focused, where Eric is there, I might be there, working with the Chamber of Commerce or working with economic development group or specific industry verticals, and we're always happy to come and take questions like that.
So questions are starting to stack, Liz. I see about 3 or 4. We can maybe do a speed round with the time that we have, but I'll try to get to them all.
Hi, my name is Jason Shirk with Chicago Property Tax Appeal. I do these projections quite a bit for investors, and I think the most important thing is in property tax assessments is not to create a stigmatization about where their assessments are going to go, but I've seen it so many times where somebody's either buying a property or wanting to look into buying a property, and they happen to buy it in a triennial assessment year, and their property tax assessment is spiked, and they're wondering where it's going to go. And I guess I have one interesting suggestion. I mean, we actually have the financial documents. It's actually required to do, to turn in 1120S or 8825, and as long I see the number of the cap rate kind of coalesce around 8%, either at the assessor or at the board of review, and I think everybody's happy with that. And how I explain it to investors is it says, you can make about 8% on your property. I know it's more in other places, but you don't have the public transportation system, you don't have the volume of workers, et cetera, all the benefits that go with Chicago. And so, I'm seeing, I had one hotel down by O'Hare, and I think the assessment, due to COVID and whatnot, was down at about 22 million, and then it spiked up to 47 million. And I did a projection. He's already into financing, is about to close, and I'm like, well, your taxes were 1 million next year, but they're going to go up to 2.2 million. And that's this unpredictability of where ultimately, by going through the process of the assessor and the board of review and ultimately PTAB, we can't really guarantee, what analyst you're going to get or who's going to look at it and whatnot. And so I guess an idea for the assessor is, I know that you could, at PTAB, the assessment can actually move up. That's a danger of going to PTAB. But, there's an idea of making the assessments a little lower and then either changing the Constitution or doing some other mechanism where we can raise that assessment, maybe to where it really should be. And that goes also to, certificates of error. It gets really difficult when somebody buys a property and you may get a poor representation, and then ultimately, if things don't go right, you have to eat that tax bill. And then once it's stuck in PTAB, right, the Board of Review may not look at it, the assessor may not look at it. And what we want to do for investors, because once that happens once, that information spreads like wildfire. We get stigmatized. And so either with a certificate of error or assessing things in such a marginal way to where, okay, I can trust the assessor and I can trust the assessing bodies to ultimately get it right. I can make that 8% and I can, so an idea in maybe changing the Constitution is that you might want to be able to raise an assessment because you're getting that financial, you're getting that financial information. It's in black and white. Does that make sense? What I'm?
You went on and you just talked about how subjective and time-consuming and irrational the process is. Right. The simple fix is to have a simple objective formula. It's not the assessor to apply subjectivity to arbitrarily lower or increase a little bit or a little less the assessment. The formula should just dictate the number. It's 8 times the net rent. It's 1.5 times your total revenue, room revenue. It's a simple objective formula so that everybody knows. If the hotel you mentioned, the owner should know that his tax bill is going to be based on the room revenue he collects next year. Simple as that. He's got nothing to complain about. If the hotel does better, his tax bill goes up a little bit. But the key is objective formula, and it's a simple fix. It's up to the assessor to just issue a guideline. He could do it tomorrow and say, effective January 1st, 2026, for tax year 25, I'm going to assess hotels as follows. I'm going to assess office buildings as follows. I'm going to assess industrial properties as follows, period. 5 pages each.
So Mike,
and it's done. It's fixed.
Mike, I have a question for you. Back to the early days of Fritz efforts on data transparency. Under your solution, would all of that information be anonymized and available by property type to the market?
Well, no, for hotels it's easy because that is in the public realm. But for an office building, no, the office landlord fills out a form. You got a 50-story office building, you put down your net rent, the tenant, the net rent and everything. It's easy to audit.
But would it be available publicly?
If the form is not filed, then I have no sympathy for that owner, whatever assessment the assessor wants to give him.
Right.
If you don't give him the information, then you got to live with what he has to guess. And if you make the assessor work to calculate the net rents, then I think there should be a 10, 20% penalty.
But would it be available publicly? Would your information on that office building owner, let's say it's a 40-year-old office building, would that information be available publicly to other 40-year-old office building owners who are interested in it?
I don't think it has to. I mean, it has to if there's an appeal involved, and then you got a Freedom of Information Act. But there's no reason to appeal. If you're reporting your net rent, there's nothing to appeal unless the assessor misapplies the formula and makes a mistake. But there's nothing to appeal. All the appeals in the commercial world would go away.
Right. No, but I can tell you, having traveled to Springfield on behalf of Fritz's efforts to have data transparency and have the information out there so that everybody knows what it is, there was so much pushback from the owners' groups that they didn't want that information out there, like this is somehow cold fusion, what we do in real estate, which it's not.
Yeah. First off, their anxiety is misplaced, and it's wrong. But it doesn't have to be in the public realm. But even if it was, their anxiety is misplaced. You want to give up the certainty of knowing what your real estate taxes are for somebody knowing what the net rent is of your tenant and the upper floors of your building? I'll guarantee I know it anyhow. And anybody in the real estate business knows it anyhow. I mean, there's no secrets in the business. I mean, it's a joke. And I think the Springfield pushback was giving information to the assessor without knowing the formula. What are you going to do with it? Now, if you give him the information, you know that he's going to take it and multiply it times 8, and that's the value, or multiply it times 9, that's the value, that's fine. Nobody's going to object to that.
Damon, you talked a lot about the investment environment in Chicago. I was wondering if you could make any distinction between large-scale residential investment and large-scale commercial investment.
I mean, both difficult if you just look at the numbers. I mean, I'm surprised, honestly, a little bit. I understand why it's so difficult in commercial. I'm a little bit surprised on the residential side, honestly, because we're building right now the 220 North Ada building with Shapek together, and I think will be a great success because we don't build enough right now in Chicago apartments. So I'm surprised there's not more capital coming in because you see the rent growth, you see the opportunity. Like I said early on, there's one biggest concern. We're losing our rent affordability as an advantage, like you laid out. On office space is still, I mean, Class A office space is still doing really well, but everything else is not doing great. So that's even more difficult to get capital. On the residential, I'm really surprised. I don't know if you have any insights on that. We should build more, and we need much more.
Well, what we need is revenue, future revenue. And the problem with residential today, with mandated affordable housing, and now with HR 2621, is new housing is now falling into a pool where it's not increasing, it's not paying its fair share of taxes. In fact, for 30 years under HR 2621, that new apartment building is given a huge tax benefit. Instead of building hotels, now I'm a big advocate for hospitality. They're the best revenue generator for city. A 200-room hotel will throw off $5 to $6 million in local taxes a year. A 200 apartment building with 20% affordable and HR 2621 taxes throws off maybe $300,000 of taxes and 10 jobs. My 200, by example, hotel has 120 jobs and threw off $6 million last year in taxes between guest room tax, 17.4% sales tax, and then real estate taxes.
And one side comment, if you probably saw the public conversation about the rising cost of affordable apartment units in Chicago, Dave Doig, and was a great piece by Richard Day a couple days ago in the Sun-Times. You should look at that because right now we're building affordable apartment units who are 2x higher than market rate apartment units in Chicago, which is insane. But you can look at the root causes for that. I think there's a correlation as well why it's tough to get capital for apartments right now.
Okay, question back here, and then we might be able to squeeze in one more.
And happy Tuesday to everyone. My name is Leigh Williams of
Tuesday.
Agape Services Development. I do understand and
think it's
appreciate
Wednesday.
that the draw for international investment is there. However, to address another elephant in the room is regarding the disproportion for the real redlining in terms of the Black and the brown communities who are wanting to invest, however, are being somehow ignored or overlooked. When we look also at our taxes that are on the south side and compared to the home value, which is less than north side, our taxes are much higher. So therefore, when we look to invest, we are for some reason overlooked or dismissed. Now there is where another red elephant, that redlining, actually takes place. So Mr. Mike, I know that you were looking for innovative ways and so forth and how to reassess the taxes. How do we do this? How do we basically allow the Black and brown communities to invest? We're wanting to invest, but for some reason being dismissed, looked over. So I think that there needs to be a conversation regarding that so that we can actually have also a piece of the pie, so to speak, or to even grab a portion or to create our own pies. We're very inventive, very
I'm
resourceful.
not aware of the City Hall is very aggressively looking for people to invest in the neighborhoods in the south and
We
west
would love
side.
to have
And
that
they have a lot of
conversation.
programs.
We would love to have that conversation.
You should go talk to the Department of Housing and Department of Planning at the City Hall.
We hear it, but we're looking for any forum possible because we're hearing is more so talking heads and rather than actual, resourceful or doable. So, again, we understand about the assessments and so forth, but when we see a disproportionate amount that is being absorbed within the Black and brown communities, in terms of South Side rather than North Side, which the property values are much higher, but the taxes are less. We need to also address that, and I'll be more than happy to speak to anyone regarding this to see how we can leverage.
Just one thought on this. I think what we, and that's why I don't like the term redlining as well, because there was historical true redlining, at least officially under the 60s and 70s in the city, and there's enough documentation about this, how it hurt the Black and brown community until today. I think the narrative that we tell about the South and West Side, we always talk about them as challenged neighborhoods instead of amazing opportunities to invest. And if you don't change this narrative, amazing talent, amazing people, but we have to tell the story and build as well the foundation that are truly great opportunities to invest. And we at Kaegi, we work with a lot of the Black and brown developers, construction firms to bring them into our deals, if it's a Leon Walker and other people, so we are very active on this. But I think highest level, we have to change the narrative and say, no, the South and West are great opportunities to invest. I think, we have some role models. I mean, if it's Reinsdorf and Wirtz on 1901, with what we have done now with the Quantum Park on the South Side. But that's for me always a pet peeve. We were talking wrongly about the Southwest side.
Yeah, no, Fritz asked me to chime in on the work that we're doing regarding racial equity in real estate. We have a series, so this is actually one of them regarding our commercial side, but we yearly, actually we do multiple a year. We call them racial equity in real estate conversations, where we bring in people, experts in the field, developers, academics, and we talk about this work. Chris Berry is a leading voice at the University of Chicago. He's been working with us hand in hand and has a study showing the progress that we've made on regressivity. And that's one of the things that we saw when we first came in. Fritz did a study, and exactly right, as you said, the higher end properties on the spectrum, particularly in residential, were being assessed lower. And also they were appealing more, right? So they got, sort of a double benefit. And the more modest homes, areas like the South, West Side, south suburbs were being overassessed. And so Chris Berry showed we do have some work continuing to do in the south suburbs, but we made a lot of headway in Chicago on the south and the west side. So encourage you to read that and to follow our racial equity and real estate work here in the assessor's office. Last question, okay? And then we're gonna let Liz and the panel close out.
Drew Wade again, SRGB Capital. Just bear with me, but just thinking about the future and thinking about, step into my time machine. And we're talking about, equity on that level, but I'm also thinking about, with all this momentum, this is basically the new Silicon Valley, which is also based on the original Silicon Valley, which I believe is right here in the Midway. And if you think about the present Silicon Valley, what people think of the Bay Area, there's been an issue with, ultimately, values. You bought a house right next door to the garage where, Steve Jobs, launched Apple, and maybe you could have, the value was X, and now it's, through the moon. And so how do we ensure, is there any thought to, because this problem, it's all going to be solved. We will have this rich people problem of being the Silicon Valley. And when we're at that day, which will be here quicker than then, how do we ensure that the people are here that invested in wherever that is in the county, in the area, will be able to remain when values go through the moon as we do the code fusion, which I believe will actually take place here in Ground Zero. Thank you.
Well, it's affordability. I mean, Chicago, Compass just issued their numbers for 12/31/24. Chicago is still one of the most affordable big cities in the United States. And of the top 50 cities in the United States, the gap between ownership and rental in Chicago is the least. It's only $118 a month. In the Bay Area, it's $7,000 a month. The difference between the average cost of owning a home in San Francisco versus renting in San Francisco. Chicago, the cost of home ownership is, as it costs today, is almost equal to cost of renting, unlike the other 49 cities ahead of us.
Yeah.
No, Silicon housing and
he talks about the future. So whatever, if we are booming, what happens?
Well, if we're booming, hopefully values will go up. But hopefully people won't get priced out of housing because they're starting at such a low level.
And I think that the best strategy is to build more housing. We have completely lost in Chicago growth mindset, where instead of someone saying, hey, I want to build 10,000 apartment units this year. We cannot tax our way out of it. I think all this regulation to try to protect against gentrification, if you look at anywhere globally, the best way to do is you have to build more units. And we have lost that growth mindset, which makes Chicago so special. That's, I think, long term, because Mike is right. Right now, we are very affordable, but if we boom, we have to build more. Right now, we're in the opposite trend. We don't build enough. That's it, I think. That's the show.
Yes, no, thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate everybody being here. I'm going to let, the gentleman I'm with wrap up what their final thoughts are. I would say that, the good news is that what you can see when you look around the country is that a region is only as strong as the core, right? You only have to look to Detroit to see what happened when that urban core was hollowed out and what the result has been. Detroit has great suburbs, and the city of Detroit, despite its best efforts and amazing opportunities and amazing physical locations, still struggles. So I think what we need to do in Chicago is keep the core strong, because I think that'll be the expanding pie to growth and maintaining affordability.
For me, just to thank you, Liz, for moderating. Thank you, Mike. You're such a great role model for me with your thinking, what you build. And Fritz as well. I think you've done a phenomenal job the last 6 years with your team. The transparency, the digitization. I love the data store your team built. And you also to build just a platform and invite people like us always in to make our city better. I really appreciate your leadership, Fritz.
I would just like to thank everybody for coming today, and especially thank the assessor for allowing me to have this platform to introduce some new ideas that I think is so important to the city. I can renovate as many historic buildings as I possibly can afford to do, and the market will absorb. But if we don't fix the uncertainty and the unpredictability of real estate taxes, my mission to try to revitalize the downtown area is going to be hamstrung. So I look to this gentleman right here, and I thank him for his open-mindedness and his willingness, and the fact that he has the same goal is let's get that objective and transparent system, And that's why I've been working for the last year with the assessor's office. Hopefully some of the ideas and the formulas that we discussed today, it will be adopted by the assessor, may be announced. I keep my fingers crossed, and I have faith in his office and his goals that we'll get some relief and some certainty, hopefully in the next few months.
Thank you all. And we will shift to our last panel for the day. We are going to have the leaders of our valuations team come up and have a bit of a roundtable. And so I'd like to introduce Michael Piper, our Chief Valuations Officer. And Mike, why don't you and your team come on up and we'll kick this next panel off.
I can stand, I don't care. Just doing a little bit of literal housekeeping. I can stand if you guys got all the chairs. It's fine. It's fine. I'm good. No, you guys are good. I got one nice one. Are you sure? Yeah. Okay. Good morning, once again, everyone. Thank you all for coming out in this kind of horrendous weather. We appreciate the turnout. I just want to take a couple minutes to say, first of all, my name is Michael Piper. I'm the Chief Valuations Officer here at the Cook County Assessor's Office. And I want to just take a minute to thank our previous guests, Liz, Mike, and Mike. I've been in this for about 30 years in the appraisal assessment field, and I can listen to you guys, experts, talk about what you're talking about all day long, and I'd like us to continue to have some conversations. I know you've spoken with the assessor, and we appreciate you being here today. I also want to thank our team, Nicole and Jean, for the presentation on the permits earlier. One of the things that you might have heard the term transparency being a goal of Fritz's administration, and I think what Nicole and Jean put together kind of helps further that along, so I want to thank you guys for doing that. And finally, Assessor Fritz Kaegi, who opened up today's program. I met Fritz in 2018, just maybe a month or so after he was elected. I was in Chicago for a conference, and he found me, and he invited me to come over and talk. At that time, I was the assessor in Philadelphia, where I worked for about 28 years. And I loved his ideas and his initiative. It's as if he's been thinking about being the assessor for many years. He already had the ideas in his head, what needs to happen in terms of transparency, in terms of addressing equity, as the young lady in the back was talking about, in terms of addressing regression problems. So about a year after that, I came to work here. I started with the office in 2020. Like I said, I worked in Philadelphia for about 28 years, the last 5 years as the assessor. Born and raised in Philadelphia, grew up, did my undergrad and grad at Temple University, and I'm happy to be here, part of this wonderful team. I have with me today 5 of the valuation team's directors who are going to talk about their areas of expertise. We have Ray Gottner, our residential director. We have Millie Terzic, our Director of Special Properties. We have David Lehman, our Valuations Research Director. We have TJ Schemmel, our Commercial Director, and Brian Cibula, who is our Director of Special Projects for Commercial. And we'll start with Ray. Make sure I'm working this right. Okay, so Ray is the best qualified person to talk about Cook County and residential. The majority of the 1.8 parcels in Cook County are residential. And as you know, we do not go in everyone's house and look at these one at a time. We do modeling, and Ray is going to talk a little bit about the modeling. Ray is a longtime resident of Cook County, in fact, worked for the county itself for about 18 years before he came to the assessor's office, grew up in the area, has a degree in geography from Western Illinois. Ray Gottner, Director of Residential Valuations.
Hello, everyone. How are you doing? Today, we're going to talk about how we come up with residential values. We predict values with a model, and that model uses over 80 different features. But we want to remember something. Location, location, location. Over 50 of our inputs that help us predict value are locational based. Where the home's located, how far we are from mass transit, how far are you from the lake, how far are you from all the other amenities in this wonderful area. Location, location, location. We spend so much time comparing sales of like homes to other like homes. Things like building square footage, bathrooms, half baths, number of rooms. You know, these are the bases that we use to predict value. But I just really want to point out that over half of the value you get from your home is from the location of that home. Go to the next one, Mike. These are on the screen are the top 5 predictors of value. Building square footage, your neighborhood code, which of course is location, your class code, which is related to the size of the property, what the property is being used for, your elementary school district, and the census tract. These are the 5 features that have the biggest predictive value for your home. So, when you want to appeal your value, the biggest driver there will be comparable properties. Now, the question is, what is a comparable property? Think apples to apples. It's not the 5 cheapest houses in your neighborhood compared to your house. It is, we're going to look at houses just like your house. So, relatively close in size. A masonry home versus another masonry home, where we want to compare, we compare homes of similar age. So a home built in 1950 is not very comparable to a home built in 2010. But we see that on appeals all the time, that people get their assessment, they're unhappy with the value, they appeal, and they're living in a 30-year-old 2-story home, and they're like, hey, look at these 80-year-old homes that are 1 story down the street. They're so much cheaper than me. This is so unfair. Well, you're comparing apples to oranges. We are comparing apples to apples. We are always going to look at the 5 closest comparables. When people appeal your property, the most important thing you can do is that appeal narrative. Tell the assessor's office how your home is unique. Tell me why your comparables are better than my comparables. We talk to people all the time that are unhappy with their value, yet I have 10 sales from their property that I could hit with a golf club, and I'm a terrible golfer. I have a great short game, but in best ball, no one's going to use my drive when we get off the tee box. But if I can get you 10 sales that are that close to your property, those are truly comparable properties. So when the assessor is valuing your home, the things closest to you that are like you are going to be the biggest predictor of value. And that's my spiel.
Ray, let me ask you a question. You said a couple things, but one thing you hammered home was the idea of comparability. So if I'm petitioning the Cook County Assessor to lower my value, why shouldn't I just pick the lowest comps?
The problem with just picking the lowest comps is you're going apples to oranges. If you have a newer home that's 3,500 square feet and you're coming to our office with an 1,100 square foot ranch and you're like, this ranch home is so much cheaper than mine. Well, yeah, it's a lot. It's 1/3 the size of your home. Of course it's going to have a lower value. We want to be fair, we want to be equitable, and we want to be transparent. And to do that, we need to be apples to apples. You need to not be a 5,000 square foot mansion in the Gold Coast and come back and say, well, look at these 7 apartment buildings that are about the same size. They're so much lower than mine. Well, you live in a single family home and those are apartment buildings. Those are 2 completely different things and they're not acceptable comparables.
Ray, you get, maybe last year you got about 200,000 residential appeals, and I know your team goes through the appeals and they're looking at them and they're trying to figure out, is this something I should spend some time with and give it the weight that it deserves because they've made a reasonable argument, in other words, apples to apples, or is it something I could toss aside because they're not making a reasonable argument and I got 200,000 appeals to go through? It sounds like what you're saying is, give us a reason to force the analysts to take a look, because if they don't look at something that's been sent in that's reasonable, they got a problem to deal with you.
Yes. I mean, that's where that appeal narrative comes in. If your home is in a neighborhood that has a lot of tear downs and people are remodeling and rebuilding homes and none of that work's been done in your home, your condition's not as good. Take pictures. Show me why your home isn't in the same condition as the Instagram-ready home that's sold down the street. Tell my analysts what's going on. Give us something to hang our hat on. We can make things happen. To appeal your assessment and say the assessor's wrong and stupid isn't a valid reason for my analyst to take time and go through the appeal. Give us something to work with. We're going to go through and we're going to be fair and equitable about it. We're going to compare you to homes like your home that are near your home.
Thank you, Ray. Very good. Very clear. Appreciate it. Next, we have up our Director of Valuations Research. David Lehman is a veteran of not only the assessment but the appraisal field. He's been in this business for over 30 years. He's done work for FDIC. He's an MAI, and any of you all that know about appraisal know that's the designation to have if you're in this field. David's been with our office for about 1.5 years as a commercial manager, and he is now our Director of Valuations Research. What he's going to talk about is more than just the research, but the research is primarily what Millie's team, TJ's team, uses to come up with inputs that make sense to valued in properties. Dave has done his master's, UIC, master's in urban planning, and bachelor's here at Eastern Illinois. Okay, David Lehman.
Thank you, Mike.
Sure.
So the Director of Valuations Research basically is to support the industrial and commercial groups in developing their values. And perhaps the easiest way to break it up is to say there's 3 parts. The first part is our first pass valuations. And in that's our initial value. We call it the notice value, where we use the income capitalization approach to value all commercial and industrial properties.
Quick question, Dave. First pass, is that what gets mailed to the property owner?
It gets mailed out in the form of a notice value.
Okay.
All right. So before that notice goes out, we put together the inputs. So the rents, the vacancy rates, the operating expenses, the cap rates that are used to develop these values for the first pass is something that my department provides to these groups, and it will become more robust in that area in the next year or two. So that's the first pass value. The second pass value, or is a process, is when the first pass notice value goes out and the taxpayer has an opportunity to appeal. And during that process, the petitioner, the taxpayer, will provide an appraisal. And so then it's a analysis for the second pass value to look at the taxpayer's appraisal versus our first pass value and determine if is there a change warranted or no change. And my role in that will be to provide more specific information, not only for the income inputs, but also for the sales and for cost approach where appropriate. The third piece is the board of review. So once the second pass values are determined, then that's the assessor's certified value. That goes out, and that's your assessed value then. Once the petitioners then have the opportunity to go to the Board of Review, which is an independent body, and seek relief at that venue. So at that level, my job is to support our certified values, and as a part of that job, I do in-depth analysis on that particular asset class, but we also scrutinize the petitioner's appraisal because every once in a while they're low. So we have to make sure what's the most valid piece of information, and if we feel strongly in our certified value, I'm going to defend it at the Board of Review.
Dave, one quick question. I appreciate that. Research is something that you acquire how? I mean, I know we have third-party resources that we use, but do you anticipate conversations with developers and property owners and brokers and other folks at a more of a ground level?
Well, currently we've got a pretty robust inventory of data sources that we use. Frankly, part of my job will be to make that more accessible to all the analysts and the managers in the Industrial and Valuations group. But some of this information, the previous panel was talking about, some of that information the property owners don't want to give up. And so some of that can be obtained through the Freedom of Information Act. We would like to push for actual income and expenses and rent rolls, so we have more accurate data, especially on the large properties. But it'll include talking to the brokerage community, the other appraisal community, and property management companies as well.
Thank you, Dave. Millie Terzic is our Director of Special Properties. Millie, like Dave, has been working in real estate, and particularly in commercial property, for the better part of about 30 years, and is one of the smartest people I know. I've been doing this for a while, but I'm learning something from Millie every week. Millie actually, in addition to having an MBA from Loyola and graduating from DePaul, Millie also teaches real estate valuation at DePaul and Northwestern as an adjunct professor. We have the perfect person for this job. Millie has worked in financial analysis. She's worked with CBRE. She's worked with the heavy hitters, both on a regional and national level. And today she's going to talk about, special properties is just what it entails, all the high-value, fancy theaters, arenas, and stadiums, but also what she's going to talk about today is she's going to focus on office, hotels, and data centers. Our Director of Special Properties, Millie Terzic.
Thank you, Blake. And thank you for having me back again this year. We're going to talk a little bit about the 2025 assessment cycle, but we're first going to start talking about office. last year when we were doing the Chicago Tri, I mentioned that companies were transitioning back to the office post-COVID, and there was a flight to quality, and we've seen that where we see an increased demand in Class A and trophy space. At that time, there were limited market transactions with investors having a wait-and-see attitude. Of those transactions, most were considered to be value-added or distressed sales since that time. This year, we're assessing the North Tri. And the North Tri consists of 3 suburban office markets: the North Suburbs, the Northwest Suburbs, and the O'Hare market. As of year-end 2024, CBRE reported these markets accounted for nearly 62 million square feet of suburban inventory with modified gross asking rents in the $26.25 per square foot level and the underlying vacancy of about 29.4%. Due to its proximity and to the airport and to downtown, the O'Hare market outperforms the North and Northwest markets, suburban markets, in terms of overall occupancy, which is now at 22.9%, and modified gross asking rents at $30.77 a square foot. Cap rates for market value transactions vary per class and range between 6 and 10%. However, the cap rates for distressed or value-added sales transactions are higher due to the perceived risk associated with lease-up and stabilization. Since COVID, like the downtown market, there really have been limited market sale transactions. The assessor is cognizant of these market conditions and has been fair, reasonable, and transparent in its underwriting of commercial properties, which can be seen on our website. Next, I would like to address hotels. I always like to look at all the national data. I like to look at international trends. And I also like to see what we have in our portfolio of appeals. So we get a chance to go back and look at some of the properties that have been previously appealed to the office. So we take in a tremendous amount of data. So I just wanted to share with you some of the general highlights of the market. So per JLL, the global hotel industry remained resilient in 2024, with RevPAR growing at 4%. It was noted that the U.S. and Middle East markets fully rebounded since COVID, but we're seeing the Asian Pacific markets still lagging 2019 levels. Global investment activity grew 7% in 2024, but is still below historic levels, due in part to lower average deal size. Impending loan maturities, deferred capital expenditures, and property improvement plans will stimulate recapitalization of existing properties in the near term. Globally, JLL anticipates 3 emerging trends for 2025, including the increased demand for lifestyle and experiential driven concepts. Increased global travel is influenced by emerging markets and the adoption of artificial intelligence as a mean of offsetting labor and other costs for back-of-the-house operations, energy usage, and operational efficiency. Hotel industry leaders such as STAR track industry metrics. We look at these metrics very carefully, and we try to assimilate that information to the Chicago market. On a national level, STAR reported that average daily rates increased 1.8% to $219.89 per key. Occupancy increased 3.8% to 69.4%, and RevPAR increased 2.2% to $153.79. Depending upon the hotel class, EBITDA, which is the earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, rose 1.4% to 28.6%. The assessor's office looks to industry data, recent sales transactions, and the actual financial data submitted on appeal each year. As there is no consistent standard for determining business enterprise value, the assessor adjusts market cap rates upwards of 150 to 250 basis points to reflect an adjustment of about 20% for this business enterprise value. Based on appeals last year, the assessor's office noted that several reported luxury brand hotels were operating as full-service upper upscale hotels. Thus, on appeal, many of the assessor's first pass values were reduced to reflect this reality. And this is where I'm going to mention Michael Reschke's comment today. If property owners did provide that information in advance, we'd have better, more direct property information, and we could make more clear decisions. So the fact that if you can provide more direct information to the assessor's office ahead of time, we can take that into consideration. Overall, the Chicago hotel market has rebounded. Hospitality trends rank Chicago among the top 25 markets nationally to show increases in occupancy. Condé Nast Traveler magazine voted Chicago the best city in the nation for the past 7 years due to its world-class architecture, cultural, sports, and entertainment venues. Convention business is slowly returning, and special events such as Lollapalooza, the DNC National Convention, and NASCAR have had a positive impact on Chicago. Consistent with national trends, the office concurs that the Chicago hotel sector is well poised for the future. Lastly, I wanted to touch on data centers since this is one of the biggest areas of growth here. Industry leaders are bullish on data center development. According to Colliers, data center demand is expected to grow 10 to 20% annually through 2030. JLL noted that the U.S. co-location data center market has doubled in size since 2020, with construction increasing more than sevenfold in the past 2 years. In 2024, CBRE reported that the supply in primary data center markets increased 34%. Although the outlook is positive, CBRE noted some hurdles as data center operators have experienced higher construction costs, equipment pricing, and material shortages. Due to increased demand and tight supply, CBRE reported that the monthly average asking rate for 250 to 500 kilowatts in primary markets such as Chicago increased 12.6% to $184.06 per kilowatt. Some of the trends that we're seeing is that AI occupiers are influencing site selection, design, and operational requirements. Historically, Northern Virginia dominated net absorption. In 2024, CBRE reported that Atlanta led the market for the first time. CBRE views markets like Charlotte, Northern Louisiana, and Indiana as appealing for hyperscale and co-location providers due to tax incentives, available land, and greater power accessibility. Chicago is one of the nation's primary markets. In 2024, it had an inventory of 640.9 megawatts. Absorption was 72.4 megawatt, and rental rates were in the $175 to $200 per kilowatt per month. Based on industry sources, data center construction represents some of the highest value worldwide in terms of physical construction and some of the most valuable buildings in our taxing jurisdiction. Based on industry sources, total costs range from $500 to north of $1,000 per square foot for the powered shell, or between $7 and $15 million per megawatt. Data center operators are private about sharing information on cost. Thus, we rely on public information, including REIT data and/or specific data we procure from appeals and permits. Data centers are income-producing properties. Leases are based on electrical power consumption. The assessor's office considers the income approach and/or the cost approach to value. For assessment purposes, the real estate portion, or the powered shell, is valued and incorporates the power, security, infrastructure, and redundancy necessary to serve its end users regardless of megawatt consumption. Data center operators claim that personal property and business enterprise value, including intangibles such as patented technology and branding, are included in the income stream. This is not the case, as design, layout, and access are intrinsic to its use. These services are necessary and customary, and typically these expenses are fully deducted as these leases are triple net. Cap rates for data centers are in the 6% range today. Often, consultants are hired by end users to determine potential site location options. As real estate Taxes represent one of the largest expenses associated with the operation of a data center. Consultants weigh in on several factors in their recommendation process. The Assessor's Office has clear policies and procedures which are outlined on our website. This information could be used to make informed decisions. If these incentives are offered, the Valuations team works closely with the Legal Incentives team in implementing these programs. I think it's most important to remember that Chicago's central location, temperate climate, strong manufacturing base, extensive rail and fiber optic network, and low-cost power makes it well poised for future data center development. Today, it is one of the most affordable primary data centers markets in the country. And before I leave, I just want to thank my team for being here today and for all their hard work, because none of our valuations would have worked if we didn't have a great team of analysts working with us. So thank you.
I do see a few of your fans out in the audience here, Millie. So I got a couple questions. That's a lot to unpack on data centers. I want to jump back to hotels for a minute. You mentioned EBITDA. You didn't say it. You spelled it out. Thank you. But that's typically a key measurement of success, financial success for hotels, and that in addition to per key, dollar per key. But you also mentioned a statistic that I'm not sure folks tend to look at as something that's as important now, and that is, you said the Chicago area is in the top 25 of, I'm looking at that like a basketball term, like the top rebounders, right?
It is. We have
Rebounding
really,
since...
Yeah, last year we turned the corner. And,
okay, since the shutdown, the
yes,
pandemic related, okay.
Right. In 2019, after COVID started, what happened was that everybody was saying, all industry professionals were saying that it would take 2 to 3 years for the market to rebound. Chicago pretty much turned around in about 2.5 years. And what we've been seeing is a tremendous amount of tourism coming back into the city. Our occupancy levels have gone up. Now, corporate business is coming back. We're seeing more and more convention business coming to town. We see more corporate meetings. But the one thing about Chicago is that we have always consistently been a transportation hub. And we have Montgomery Ward to thank for our beautiful lakefront, our preserved lakefront. We have beautiful architecture in the city of Chicago. We have Broadway on Chicago. We have so many beautiful opportunities here to, in terms of culture, in terms of entertainment, and even in our sporting events. I know we we have good years and we have bad years, but you know what? We are one of the few cities in the world that have so many professional sports teams. And we have a great educational system. So we have a network of medical professionals that are coming in for conventions. We have, the best education that money could buy in terms of Northwestern University, DePaul University, Loyola University, Roosevelt University. We have so many major colleges and universities, and people aggregate to the city of Chicago. And we happen to be the heart of the country. So I think that hotels really made a comeback, not only because geographically we're a great city, but we have great leadership, we have great opportunities, we're a very diverse economy, and we keep on, and we are also Midwesterners, which make us very welcoming. So thank you.
One other quick question. This is on the data centers. So when everything kind of shut down in March of 2020, one of the resources that we have in our office is the Bloomberg terminal, which Assessor Kaegi is the expert on. And one day I happened to be in there, and we were looking at, that gives you information about the valuation of businesses, but some of the REITs that included data centers, while offices and everything else were suffering high vacancy numbers, the numbers for REITs that included data centers, and those REITs would include 75% real estate if it's in a REIT. So the data centers, they were going one way, okay? The demand is there from what you're saying. Meanwhile, in the office, you say there's a flight to quality, so the B and C office spaces may be suffering higher vacancies. So what's to stop someone from saying, you know what, I'm gonna knock all these less than trophy office buildings down and put data centers up?
Well, there's almost too much of a good thing. You know, we could have a power issue.
Overbuilding.
And that a little bit of overbuilding as a result of that. You know, we've had, because we were a strong manufacturing base, that made Chicago very, very attractive because we have good power and we have an excellent fiber optic cable network here in Chicago. And if you look at some of the development that has gone on in the city of Chicago, that, you know, that directional has been kind of going to the northwest. So you have like the Microsoft Center in Elk Grove Village. You have the Quantum now that's going in the south. And I grew up in South Chicago, so I'm very proud of that development coming to the south side because I think that's a great opportunity for us to grow. But, you know, you look at places like DeKalb that have built the Meta Center. You know, here's a greenfield that had created some opportunity. So we are seeing development continuing. We have QTS is actually expanding in the South Loop at 28th and Ashland. So we see that data centers are going to continue to grow, but we have to be cognizant of the power sources. And Dave, maybe you want to chime in on that.
Well, the demand for data center land right now is so great that a company called Streams Data Center last year finally assembled 55 lots to assemble one 35-acre data center site where they'll put, I believe, 3 large data centers. So,
And Dave, excuse me, that's not in the city where
that's
land's
in
very
Elk Grove.
expensive. That's up in Elk Grove.
Yeah, and Elk Grove in that area has really turned into be the hub of the suburban data center market. And so this guy basically assembled 50 single-family lots, bought everybody out, and that's very, very difficult to do. But that's the extent that the data center developers are going through to get the properly zoned land that's got the that's adjacent to the fiber optic cables, that's got the power, and the size, because no one's going to build a data center on 1 acre of land. They're going to build it on typically 10 acres of land, and they need a lot of room. Usually land to building ratios over 2 to 1. So it's not easy to find. Most of the properties, the parcels, industrial parcels out there are actually a lot smaller. So it's an assemblage game, and suburban office buildings that were built in the 1980s and 1990s are being torn down and being replaced by data centers.
Right. Just take a look at what's happening out in Hoffman Estates. The Sears corporate headquarters is going to be repositioned as a data center property. So that's really case in point.
Yeah, and these data centers land is going for $40 to $60 a square foot, and that's excluding demolition costs.
In Elk Grove.
And,
Millie,
and
yeah.
that's more expensive than any other asset class, really.
Dave and Millie, you guys unpacked a lot of information, but I did want to kind of expound on the data center because that's we get questions about the direction it's going. I got something from Dave Morrison, our policy deputy, the other day about the direction of data centers. It's unreal, but thank you both. Thank you, Millie. A lot of information. I want to move on to our director of commercial property. So Millie takes care of the high value stuff. But TJ's unit takes care of the majority of what we would call commercial property, the industrial, the retail, the multifamily, the large multifamily. TJ, believe it or not, has been in this business for quite a while. He worked in this business for about 12 years or so before he came to the assessor's office. He's worked with Avison Young, Cohn Resnick, graduate of University of Cincinnati, our commercial director, TJ Schemmel.
Thank you, Mike. As noted, I manage 3 asset classes. The majority of my properties are multifamily, retail/commercial. It's going to exclude the large office. And then industrial. I'm going to touch upon the trends that we're seeing on these. It's going to mostly focus on the north suburbs and also what's happening or what happened last year in the city of Chicago. So I'm going to start with multifamily. Since the pandemic, this has been probably the darling of the commercial real estate. As noted in the panel today, we still need to build more. What you're seeing is high ownership cost for residential, so more people are going to multifamily, and that's driving vacancy rates down. Right now, Marcus Millichap says that rents grew 2.8 year over year. That outpaces the national average. The vacancy rates overall in this tri, we're seeing around 5%. On location, it can be as low as 3. 3 to 6 is kind of what we're seeing now. When I say that, that doesn't mean that there might be areas that are higher. This is what we're seeing right now. As we go through this northern tri, we expect this to continue, but if we come into areas that have higher, we will adjust that. We do realize that along with higher rents, it's not always a higher NOI or as high as you would expect. It's being eaten up a lot by insurance, payroll, and utilities. Those are all driving the NOI down. But in terms of investor demand, this is still the class that has the highest with the highest assets or highest prestige assets selling at high numbers. E2 in Evanston, Northgate Crossing in Wheeling, and Haven and Hoffman Estates are some examples. In terms of cap rates, we're seeing as low as 5, but really 5 to 8.5 is the range we're seeing currently. It's expected to remain stable / continue to grow. As noted in the panels, people think there's a shortage here. I think there is, which means that this should continue to take off. That is the multifamily. Next, we'll move to of the 3, I would say the most varying, which is retail. If you read the news, you're going to see a lot of stores are going out of business. The Loop retail you walk around is not doing as well as we would all like. With that noted, if you take Chicago as a whole, the vacancy rate is one of the lowest it's ever been, with 7 consecutive quarters of vacancy dropping in retail. It's a little bit hard to believe because you see some vacant storefronts, but a lot of this has been due to the pipeline. Over the last 12 months, 330,000 square feet of retail space was completed. To compare that from 2015 to 2019, 1.5 million was completed on average. The pipeline is very small. Even with the closures that are happening with some of the medium to big box retailers, they're actually getting backfilled by different retailers, some are non-traditional. I don't know, the rent growth is not as big as they would probably like, but that's kind of the trade-off, is that the vacancies that are happening are still being absorbed, but not at a rate that people would want. So owners still don't have a command over the rents yet, meaning that they can't push them higher, but they are finding people to backfill them. I don't know if people know the pickleball trend. That's becoming a huge thing now. Non-traditional retailers like that are really coming into areas. Retail asking rents increased 1.5% over the last year, and then it's going to become a theme on all 3 of mine. Operating costs are up all over the board. The last one, industrial. Just a minute. So there's a lot going on in the news, and they touched upon it. I'll say that tariffs, onshoring, all that is actually going to bode well for the industrial. And also, if you look at the United States as a whole, Chicago is the rail capital of this country. I would say it's the heartbeat. Since the pandemic, this asset class, in terms of market appreciation, is second only to multifamily. There was, at the end of last year, some talks of it potentially being overbuilt / leveling off. That has not happened now. If anything, there's been a slight uptick lately. I think a lot of people are realizing that they might have to bring a lot more to the U.S. The north tri, or the north suburbs, if you look at it, it's the industrial base of this county. Elk Grove is enormous for industrial, but also then you have major corridors, you have major rail lines, and you have an airport there that is second in the U.S. now. So this is projected to continue to appreciate. Vacancy rates are at 4.9%, which is below the national vacancy of 7%. We're actually seeing some as low as 3% in townships. 3 to 8 is kind of the range. Capitalization rates, they're stabilizing. We're looking at about a 6.5% to 8%. But overall, this is a very strong try for industrial. And if we're looking to the future, industrial should continue to appreciate. It all depends how much of the political climate, I think, affects the industrial base and how much has to come back. The good news is, if you look at this country, almost everything industrial runs through the city. Those are the trends that we're seeing. As with every property, it's individual in nature. I'm going to kick it back to Mike Piper, who will then go into introduce Brian, who can go more individual property based.
Thank you, TJ. A quick question. So you said on the commercial at the beginning of your presentation, you said that it's kind of a mixed bag. It depends where, and I guess it depends what, because, I mean, when we look at restaurants and we look at retail establishments, those are types of businesses. Retail, Walgreens today might be a pickleball stadium tomorrow.
Yeah.
Okay. And I know a lot of the restaurants that closed 5 years ago they've either reopened as something totally different or maybe reopened as the same but under new ownership. But the retail, some of that has just changed kind of permanently. So I guess it depends on the property type also.
It depends on the property type. I'll say that the small pipeline is good and bad. It's bad because it shows that there's not a lot of development for commercial right now, which as a city we'd want. But it's also good because the Joann Fabrics, the other national ones that are going out of business, there's a demand there because there's no supply. So, from our standpoint, I would love to have more cranes in the sky building, or not really cranes, but just building out more retail. It's not there yet, but the good news is that our vacancy rate isn't growing. If our vacancy rate was growing substantially, then that would be an issue. But, I mean, the data shows that for 7 straight quarters, we've been down. With that said, though, as with anything, retail more than any other group, it's location, location, location. And we realize there are areas in the county that are hurting in terms of retail. I want the Loop to come back. I want it to come back stronger. I'll say I walked over here even in the pouring rain today, and it's the first time I've had to walk through I would say, the commuter train traffic. And I was pleasantly surprised to see how packed it was. I didn't like having to walk around all the umbrellas, but that's something I haven't seen in a while, so I'm happy that it's back. I think that retail overall is stronger than people think because we see downtown. And I think, when we get back to the city try, I hope that we can put a lot lower vacancy number. But in terms of the northern suburbs, it's a very low vacancy rate for most retail.
The absorption rate is a little better up there, I would say.
Yes.
Thank you, TJ. Finally, our last director for today, Brian Cibula. If you go to the Cook County Assessor's website over the past 3 years, you will be led to, and Brian's going to walk you through it, the valuation reports. But what it is actually line by line, individual properties. When people say, how did you get to that number? Line by line, the inputs, the expense ratios, the cap rates. And one of the reasons we put it out there is because at the top of the assessor's list is transparency, but also we want feedback. If we're doing something wrong, you're going to tell us, especially if we say you have a 5-story building and you tell us, yeah, but there's an atrium there. It's not 5 stories. There's a big hole in the middle. We want to know. Brian's the person responsible for that. Brian's worked in all facets of commercial real estate, property management, financial analysis. He is also Michigan, University of Michigan graduate. Brian Cibula, our Director of Special Projects Commercial.
Thanks, Mike. As my rather vague title might imply, I'm responsible for a number of different things in the industrial and commercial department. As one of those, one of my main responsibilities is to effectively build the valuation models, the Excel-based valuation models. And as a part of that, due to Fritz's desire to be more transparent and get more information out to the public to understand what we're doing, we started in 2021 with publicizing our valuation models. And so I just want to talk about that for a little bit. We can see some examples on the screen as far as how to navigate the website to get to these worksheets. And so there's in the data section, you can get to the valuation models, and then click into, download the files. It's organized per township as we do our calendar, go through our calendar. We do these a town at a time, so we put the models out a town at a time. And so you just need to go to find a property, you would need to go to the town that the property is located in, and then open the file. And there'll be several tabs there because we have effectively 8 different valuation model types to segment them into kind of like-kind valuation models as far as what data is going in and how the models work. Because if you think about it, the data that's needed to properly value an industrial property is going to be much different than a multifamily property. So to find the properties, you would go to open the models, and you can see here there's several different tabs for each of the model group types. And so if you're a single-story retail, it's class 517, you would go to that tab. Multifamily, you would go to that tab. The only ones that are kind of hard are the specials, because a lot of different things can live in there. So there's banks and large office, auto repair, like lots of different things are in there. So if you can't find it anywhere else, it's probably best to look there. So bowling alleys is another one. Yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, we've as you can see with the on the visual there, we have lots of information there as far as the properties themselves, the pins that we are valuing as a one economic unit, the address, and the main things being for most of these the property use and the square footage. And so, this, I think, it allows an opportunity for the taxpayers to see what we are using to produce a value. And if you see an issue there, that's certainly a reason to file an appeal and have us take a look at it to see if we need to correct our data. Or contact Eric if you see lots of problems.
Speaking of contacting Eric, if you have any questions, Eric, we have time for a few questions today. A few, couple, okay. But after we leave today, please feel free to contact Eric. Eric is, again, the Director of Commercial Outreach, and if you need to talk to any of the folks up here or myself, Eric is the person that makes sure we get the message. Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, so like Mike said, we do have time for a few questions. If anyone has questions out there, I see one up front.
Hi, Jason Shergill, Chicago Property Tax. Now, I know you've probably answered this question a million times, but this is kind of for Brian and some of the other panelists, is that because you're not using a loaded cap rate, how are the taxes being measured in your expense ratio? Because how I typically tend to appeal is I'll just use an average of the actual expenses, and then I'll add the taxes in. And I've done a comparative analysis on using the loaded cap and then just adding the taxes in. You kind of get to the same number, but I'm really interested because I did do a continuing education with an appraiser that he was kind of shocked that the loaded cap is not being used. It's used at the Board of Review, and it's such an integral part, I think, in getting things right. But I think we get to the same place if I just add the taxes in. So how is that? Because I see those expense ratios and I can't really read them specifically. So I usually try to use like a 25% average as far as expenses, and then I'll just add those taxes in there. And typically I seem to get a little bit higher number, I guess you could say, than the expense ratio that the assessor comes up with, or the assessor's team. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? Yeah.
I listened to some of your questions earlier, so I appreciate your concern about, and we think about this also, the predictability of expenses, which is important to us too. We're not interested in, having you look at the bill and say, oh my God, what did the assessor do there? Which is why we have what Brian just showed you, but you're talking about the loaded versus unloaded that they talked about in her continuing education. I'll let one of my directors talk about it.
This is a large question. So if we look at it right now, from an investor standpoint, you're going to have a cap rate, and then the taxes are part of your operating expenses. Our models are going to be the exact same way. We're going to break the operating expenses into operating, which is exclusive of tax, and then the tax. The tax is going to be based upon our end projection right there. In terms of our actual tax rate policy, there is a new one out, right, that's published? Okay. There will be a new one published about how we handle tax rates moving forward. In the past, we're going to use the historical, for the past 2 tries, we're going to use a historical one and then the most recent equalizer. But for this try, it is going to be projected, and there will be more to come on that.
And that gets to more predictability, right? Yeah.
Okay, question back here if you guys were finished.
Hi, I'm Felicia Johnson. I'm a licensed realtor, general contractor, and also a property owner. So I interact with property taxes in different ways. My first question is, when people submit an appeal, if they don't present a thorough case, are they given any feedback on how to amend that submission?
They're given a reason why the appeal failed. In other words, it's not changed. They don't get the reduction. There's, on the one hand, we have a lot of reasons that we can offer. On the other hand, they tend to be kind of stock answers, because if you can imagine, like I said, Ray had a couple 100,000 appeals. That's just residential last year, so we don't necessarily articulate a different specific reason. But yeah, they're given a reason.
Okay, and then
I would like to say, no matter what they submit to us, we're going to run a uniformity grid and compare them to, again, apples to apples, the homes in that neighborhood, regardless if they give us comparables, no evidence. We're still going to look at every single appeal and run a valuation uniformity analysis no matter what.
Thank you. And my second question is concerning predictability of taxes. It's become a more frequent conversation with my residential and commercial clients. So am I right to summarize from today's conversation that we are to look to the historical taxes in terms of predictability, or are we able to, I'm sorry, I'm trying to read my handwriting. If we're not able to present any convincing data, do we just wait for a reevaluation?
Well, to answer the first part of that question, the historical tax rate is not the best way to go. No, that's not what you want to do. I mean, we want it to be more predictable, so what Nicole's team is going to publish pretty soon is something that I think gets us there, but it's not something that you could look at and say, well, the tax rate in this particular jurisdiction was this last year, or averaged out for this, that, and that for the last 3 years. It's, you can find out what tax rate we've used on the website. Yeah. I hope I answered that part of the question. The other part was, well, that was pretty much it, right?
Yeah,
okay.
I think you did, but I feel like that the information presented on the website is the historical data.
Yeah, it's after the fact.
Yeah, so
That's
we
true.
would be looking at that data as opposed to having some other basis for predicting what the taxes would be.
Right, right.
I'll just add real quickly. Yes, look at the commercial valuation models that get posted publicly. It is a historical fact that when a region is reassessed, the tax base, if property values have risen, tends to grow. And therefore, historically, we see this nice trend where in a year of reassessment, tax rates actually go down. So look forward to more of that. But even today, you can check out the existing commercial models.
And I'll just say that the first question, I appreciate you bringing that up, because we get that all the time. People that want a more thorough, exhaustive explanation for their appeal. But understanding that we do handle so many appeals, that's difficult. But in our outreach, we hear that a lot. Sandra?
Thank you, Kelwin. I'm Sandra Zellner with the Village of Park Forest. We find ourselves in the unenviable position of owning commercial property and leasing it out. That last data set that you showed, I'm curious, does the rent per square foot include property taxes? So there was a column there that had rent per square foot. Does that include property taxes?
The rent shown on our models are all modified gross, or it'd be gross. What we're assuming is the gross, which is inclusive of all payments made by the tenant.
So property maintenance, common area maintenance, and property taxes.
We're saying what a typical, in our model, the rent is what a owner would fully receive, and then you would be responsible for all expenses as well. So we're not doing a triple net where you're going to pass it through. This is a true gross or modified gross basis.
Okay, thank you. And then is there a data set that shows property tax data by square foot for all property types? So residential, commercial, industrial, is there a way to compare what property taxes are by square foot for a small 1,000 square foot home in Park Forest compared to one in Evanston, for instance?
I'm hearing no
Yeah,
by the
I don't believe we have
non-response.
that.
I think what you're asking for, I think the team understands it's more of a matter of a lot of calculations of the information we do have. Nicole?
Yeah, unfortunately, the tax rate system here in Illinois is not on a per square foot basis, but we do publish PTAX SIM, which incorporates a database of per PIN, the actual assessed value and the property tax bill for years 2023 going all the way back as far as, I think, 2006. So it's not per square foot, but maybe that data could help.
Thank you.
Okay, that needs to be our last question. Please give the panel a hand. Our valuations team.
And thank you all. And Fritz, would you like to come up and say a couple words in closing and before we let everybody get out of here?
Everybody, I hope you had a good day today. Hey, thank you. It's really our pleasure to bring all of you together here. You represent various different constituencies. You know, for our part, what we get to do at these events is we get to give you useful tools that you can use. Some of the tools that have been around for a few years, but they're improving, like PTAX SIM, like the spreadsheets that Brian has put up there, but also new ones, like our data team showed you at the panel. We give you guidance that you can use in your underwriting, in your business, and your investment decision making. So I just wanted to thank our team for providing such great outlooks, and they're here at your disposal. We have people like Eric ready to help out if you ever have questions going forward about different industries that you're in. You know, other things that have been great about this event today is just the conversations that we're having on the sidelines, again, from different constituencies. It's great to have people here from the prop tech world, people who have private businesses who are using data in terms of doing real estate analytics and working on different tools. Like, we hope that our data and the transparency that we provide helps to build and empower private businesses here in the Chicago area and elsewhere that can use this data to provide powerful things for consumers and investors. We think that's a really healthy thing in our ecosystem, not only in assessments in our property tax system, but also our economy. So we do that with joy, and it's really neat for us to see our products being used, and also people coming up with ideas. You know, if you see us encountering problems, like we're trying to solve an assessment problem that makes better, we try to do this in-house, but we love it when people in the private sector try to tackle these and say, hey, there must be a way that I can, as an entrepreneur, try to solve this data problem or this characteristics problem that you have, and we're always ready to help cultivate that too. I really love the conversations that we've had, keying off of the panelists that we had on predictability, because we had people come to us sort of inspired by the big thinking that Liz and Mike Reschke and Mike Fosnacht had, and said, I'm going to talk to people in my industry about things that we can do that, if it could be more accurate, but what can we do to make it more predictable as well? Providing we can get accuracy, what would be a more simplified way to do this to drive costs and increase predictability? We really embrace that kind of big thinking, and really glad you're here. We want to hear your suggestions. for future events. You know, this is going to be an annual thing. We think we can have spin-off events like this too. I don't want to make my outreach team go crazy here, but we can see spin-off events from this too. So thank you very much, guys. Thanks for braving the weather. Stay dry, and see you soon. Great job. But by the way, I want to say great job to my team putting this together. Let's give them a hand too. Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks.
Very good job.
Okay. Well done. Yeah. Okay.